Chapter 31. If this kind of goat meat could be developed, it would indeed have a high commercial value. Song Su thought of more. He raised an index finger. Firstly, the magic contained in ordinary goat meat far surpasses that of a bronze-level magical beast meat under normal circumstances. The cost of rearing ordinary goats and the same number of bronze-level magical beasts are two completely different concepts. The difference is huge. Then, he raised his middle finger. Secondly, although the magic structure of goat meat is strange and dangerous, when it is in a low-temperature state, the magic is very restrained and stable. This is a natural storage advantage. Under normal circumstances, once a magical beast is killed, the magic power contained within its body will continuously flow out of its body. At this time, mages and alchemists are usually required to deal with the magical beast body parts, lock in the magic within, and try to extend the stability of the magic structure as much as possible. Take the giant mouth hunting group, the largest magical beast hunting group in the Shengming continent, as an example. After they kill a magical beast, there will be professional personnel on the spot to cut off the magical beast body parts and seal them one by one. Then, they will transport them to the camp and use a magic formation to strengthen the seal. Even with layers of seals, these magical materials that originated from magical beasts will constantly leak out magic, and their value will constantly drop with the passage of time. Therefore, the giant mouth hunting group will not hesitate to use a teleportation formation to transport extremely valuable magical materials. The processing and transportation costs are very high, and the stronger the magical beast, the more so. Therefore, when the conditions are right, the giant mouth hunting group will try their best to capture magical beasts alive instead of killing them on the spot. They will first transport the living magical beasts to the big cities, then kill them there and directly sell the fresh magical materials. But there is also a problem. The cost of feeding magical beasts is also very high. Looking after and suppressing magical beasts requires a powerful extraordinaire, and the maintenance and consumption of manpower is also very high. At this point, Song Su changed the topic to the goat meat in front of them. But our goat meat is different. As long as we can create a low temperature, the ice magic in the goat meat will be relatively stable, and very little will leak out. This is a very big advantage, and will save us a lot of storage and transportation costs. Song Su was very knowledgeable, and was also very familiar with the business of hunting and selling magical beasts. Zhen Jin's heart palpitated as he listened. Resources were very important. Zhen Jin had his eyes on these goats. His original idea was to use these goats as mounts to develop cavalry. In the future, when he became the Lord of White Sand City, if he could have an elite cavalry, it would be of great help to him in controlling the entire situation. Therefore, Zhen Jin wasn't afraid of trouble. He had personally subdued 4 bronze-ranked white-bone goats and captured many little lambs to try to raise them. But in the end, these little lambs were all poisoned to death. The 4 bronze-head lambs were lucky enough to survive. Everyone was also poisoned by the goat meat. It could be said that Zhen Jin's goat cavalry plan was a complete failure. But now, he found another possibility, and that was to directly sell goat meat. This was life. Plans can never keep up with changes. The cold reality brought disaster, breaking people's dreams and plans, but it often brought gifts at the same time, allowing people to always have hope. Hope existed forever. The key was whether or not people could see it. Many people couldn't see hope and fell into despair. Because to see hope, one didn't simply need a pair of bright eyes, but also a good mentality or deep wisdom. Zidi's purple eyes were shining. She agreed with Song Su's words and said, "If we can find an extraordinaire who can smoothly digest these goat meat, then this will indeed be a huge business. Because ordinary goats are too easy to catch, we can even participate in artificial large-scale breeding. The cost of raising and transporting these goats is much lower than that of bronze and black iron beasts. The profits of this business are quite high, and there's also a wonderful part. As long as we sell them in large quantities at a low price, this business will also allow us to establish relations with the top nobles of the empire." Lan Zhao's expression couldn't hide his excitement. From this point of view, these goats are walking, bleeding piles of gold coins. The purple-eyed girl looked at Jinjin with bright eyes. Lord Jinjin, if we develop and control this business, it will undoubtedly be of great help to you. Whether it's competing for the position of the Lord of White Sand City or becoming the Lord of White Sand City, you will need a large amount of funds. And this business is like attaching a pair of wings to your back. It may even bring us the support of the top nobles. Jinjin nodded. He knew the prospects and benefits, but he still maintained a calm expression. This matter still needs to be considered at length. The key now is still to solve the problem of the chaotic magic power in our bodies. The atmosphere in the tent calmed down a little. Letting the ice magic power lurk in people's bodies was absolutely not a good idea, because even if the magic power's activity was very low, it would still secretly continue to corrode people's bodies. It seemed fine for a short period of time, but in fact, the magic power was constantly damaging people's vitality. At the same time, once the body temperature rose, the magic power would be a fatal killer lurking in people's bodies. Jinjin didn't want this to happen. He needed to solve his own problem, and at the same time, save the lives of others. He also needed to bring this group of people to the continent of the orcs to compete for the position of the Lord of White Sand City. So how to solve this problem? The gazes of everyone in the tent still fell on ZD. They still needed to see the performance of this pharmacist. Especially at this moment, low-level magic and Do Chi could not be used. ZD's face was solemn. She also felt the heavy burden on her shoulders. She muttered, I need to conduct an experiment first, so I can't give an answer for now. Jinjin nodded. What do you need? We will fully cooperate with you. Jinjin directly gave his tent to ZD. Lan Zhao led the team to start killing a large number of goats again. Song Su personally presided over the dissection, and Jinjin even killed a bronze head goat. The flesh, bones, and fur of the goats that contained magic power were transported into the tent in batches. The lights in the tent were lit from evening until late at night. Then, when it was close to dawn, ZD, with a pair of heavy dark circles under her eyes, lifted the curtain of the tent. I need grass. Grass. Jinjin had been waiting outside the tent. The more of this grass the goats eat, the better. Remember, it has to be connected to the roots, ZD instructed. Jinjin nodded and immediately issued the corresponding order. Fortunately, he had these subordinates and had plenty of manpower. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to meet ZD's urgent needs alone. Standing outside the tent, Jinjin watched the sky gradually brighten, knowing that the night was about to pass. He didn't know how ZD was progressing. He was worried, but he never showed it on his face. He stood outside the tent, his hand on the rough wooden handle, his body as straight as a spear. The exploration team members passing by outside the tent. Every time they saw Jinjin's figure, their impetuous hearts calmed down, and the hope in their hearts increased by a little. Everyone dug out the grass by the roots. After taking out the soil, the grass was sent into the tent in piles. The tent was like a bear that had just finished hibernation, constantly devouring, revealing an astonishing appetite. Jinjin could smell all kinds of strange smells coming from the tent. When the sun illuminated the east and the morning glow filled the sky, ZD's voice came from the tent. Lord Jinjin, are you still there? Yes, Jinjin immediately replied. Then please come in. Jinjin's spirits were lifted. He immediately turned around, lifted the curtain, and entered the tent. The smell in the tent was even more pungent, and there was even a faint mist lingering around it. ZD's face was haggard, but her crystal-clear eyes revealed a hint of excitement. Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. ZD raised the glass bottle in her hand. Inside the bottle was an azure liquid, like seawater. It turns out that these goats are victims like us. What really contains ice magic is actually these grasses. The life aura of these grasses is very ordinary, but in fact, they contain extremely rich ice magic in their bodies. After the goats ate these grasses, the magic entered the goats' bodies. Later, we ate the goats' flesh and blood, which is how we were infected with this special magic. The truth that ZD said surprised Jinjin. In that case, these grasses are comparable to magic plants, and their value is astonishing? Jinjin asked. ZD nodded. The juice of these grasses is extremely rich, especially the roots, which are comparable to berries. But I still suggest that we sell mutton. This kind of grass is easy to imitate, whether it's a drool master or the Empire's Temple of Life. As long as they get a certain amount of grass, they have the ability to cultivate it in large quantities. Not to mention the existence of the Empire's Grand Duke Sun Tzu. The potion was made, but the actual effect still needed to be tested. Jinjin certainly wouldn't be the first to take it. He first gathered a small group of people. When Huang Zhao heard this, he immediately shouted that he wanted to be the first to try. As a result, Lan Zhao scolded him, and Huang Zhao could only give up. As the younger brother, he didn't dare to rebel against his older brother. Thus, under the watchful eyes of everyone, Lan Zhao swallowed the first bottle of potion. Vomit, vomit, vomit. After Lan Zhao swallowed the potion, his whole face immediately turned blue. At the same time, he grabbed his neck with both hands, opened his mouth, widened his eyes, and vomited. But the uncomfortable thing was that he couldn't vomit anything. "Brother!" Huang Zhao cried out in alarm. The others were also somewhat surprised. "It doesn't matter. This is a normal reaction." ZD comforted everyone. As soon as her voice fell, Lan Zhao suddenly bent down, opened his mouth, and spat out a big mouthful of blood. The blood was red and blue, and there were several thumb-sized ice cubes in the middle. These ice cubes emitted a strong cold air, showing a strange blue-purple color. After spitting out these, Lan Zhao suddenly felt relaxed, and the strange blue color on his face quickly faded, returning to the original color of flesh and blood. ZD went up to check, smiled, and said, "Very good, the ice magic in your body should have been spat out. The potion I made can absorb the ice magic in your body and then spit it out. As long as you don't continue to eat the goat meat, you won't be poisoned anymore." In order to verify this point, everyone deliberately accompanied Lan Zhao far away from the camp. Not only did they walk to the place where they were poisoned, but they also walked a bit further. Lan Zhao was in high spirits, and there was no abnormality. Everyone was overjoyed, and the second and third potions were made one after another. When it was Zhang Jin's turn to drink it, it was already the sixth potion. This was specially arranged by ZD. With the previous attempts, the potion's effect was fully proven, and she was relieved to let Jinjin take it. After Jinjin took the potion, the effect was no different from Lan Zhao's. He spat out a big mouthful of blood and ice cubes, and the ice magic in his body was pulled out. But at this moment, Zhang Jin's face changed. "Is there something wrong?" ZD hurriedly came forward with concern. "Nothing." Zhang Jin shook his head, but there was still a lingering shock in his heart. The moment he spat out the blood, he felt an inexplicable sense of emptiness. This sense of emptiness was too deep for him, and he even deliberately recalled it many times before. He was too familiar with it. Not long ago, when he killed the blade spiders, his hands turned into claws and disappeared, and he felt this sense of emptiness. What's going on? Jinjin was puzzled. Chapter 32. The night was quiet. It was dark inside the tent, isolating it from the cold outside. Jinjin lay on a mat made of dried leaves and hay, covered with a thin blanket. Previously, he and ZD had been living in the open, but now it was very comfortable and warm. Waves of weakness were still lingering in his body. This was the after effect of drinking the potion. The comfortable sleeping environment and the exhaustion of his body did not make Jinjin fall asleep. The youth's eyes were wide open, his brows furrowed, recalling the emptiness he felt when he drank the potion and immediately spat out the blood. That's right, it's almost the same feeling. Jinjin was very sure now. Back then, when he was dealing with the blade spider, he lacked the only dagger and was unable to cut the spider's silk. The situation was very dangerous. But at the moment of life and death, his hands suddenly turned into sharp claws and pierced into the spider's body. Zhenjin fought back and killed the blade spider, turning the situation around. After that, his hands returned to their original state, and a deep, indescribable feeling of emptiness was transmitted from his body. These two feelings were exactly the same. The principle of the healing potion is to condense all the frost magic in my body into a ball and expel it. So, this feeling of emptiness should be the sudden huge consumption of magic in my body. Zhen Jin attached great importance to this discovery, because this mutated ability contained great value. In this current situation, if Zhen Jin was unable to use his qi, then it would be difficult for him to use his true strength. If he was in a desperate situation again, he could still turn his hands into sharp claws. No doubt he would have a powerful trump card. After all, in front of this trump card, a silver-level blade spider would be killed in one blow. According to my current train of thought, when ZD treated me, she actually inadvertently created a transformation potion. Because of this, I also mastered the transformation of monkey tail brown bear. The transformation potion was a kind of magic potion, made by a powerful potion master, which could even temporarily turn a person into a giant dragon. For nearly 100 years, the transformation potion had been popular among the upper class of the human race. The key person was Duchess Amy. Not only was this Duchess powerful and influential, but she was also very fond of beauties. She had developed thousands of transformation potions herself. Unlike the previous potion masters, most of Duke Amy's potions were very basic. The effect of the medicine was very mild. After drinking it, people would often change their skin color, hair color, or make their nose bridge a little higher, their eyes a little bigger, etc. Amy's transformation potion had become a household name in the Shengming Empire's market. This business became the biggest source of profit for Amy Hill. Zhen Jin carefully recalled. He charged to his death and killed the brown bear. He was seriously injured and on the verge of death. He had fainted a few times, and in between fainting, he had a blurry vision. He still remembered clearly that ZD had directly infused the bear's blood into his body. According to ZD's later explanation, she had no choice but to take the risk in a moment of desperation. Fortunately, she had succeeded in taking the risk. The bear's blood contained a lot of magic, just like when I eat goat meat. This magic was hidden in my body. After the transformation, this magic was consumed, causing me to feel a strong sense of emptiness. Of course, there was another possibility. It was still qi. This situation is quite complicated. At that moment of life and death, perhaps my potential was stimulated, and I instinctively used qi. This island prohibits the activation of low-level magic and qi, but the true limit of the prohibition has not been accurately calculated. Perhaps I was a gold-level cultivator. At the critical moment, I temporarily broke through the restriction and used gold-level qi. Gold-level qi is not the key. Most importantly, at that perilous moment, my bloodline was awakened. Once the bloodline awakened, a person's appearance would change. For example, a knight with dragon bloodline would grow dragon scales on the surface of his body, or a warlock with a hydra bloodline. After the bloodline awakened, the human's round pupils would turn into vertical snake pupils. The Golden Marquis of the Shengming Empire was a sanctuary-level powerhouse. In recent years, he had been very active on the battlefield and was very famous. Every time he fought a bloody battle, qi would fill his body and stimulate the awakening of his bloodline, causing his body to be surrounded by tiny golden lightning. At the same time, his originally black hair would turn completely golden, and his hair would swell and form into blocks, like muscles filled with blood. Bloodline awakening was not common. Even among the powerhouses, only a portion of them had it. This was because only when the bloodline in the body had reached a very high concentration could there be such a possibility of awakening. If I was a gold-level cultivator, based on my current age, I would definitely be very talented. And this talent also means that I have a very thick bloodline. It is not strange for a bloodline awakening to happen to me. It's just that my bloodline, if traced back to its source, should be the Gold Queen bee. After the bloodline awakening, I would have the characteristics of a queen bee, but why would it be a pair of sharp claws? Perhaps there are other bloodlines in my body? This was hard to say. Human nobles often had debauched private lives, and their bloodlines were often mixed. Not to mention that some bloodlines, if not stimulated, would remain dormant for life. Under the stimulation of death, I activated the gold chi, and a mysterious bloodline awakened in my body, turning my hands into sharp claws. But why did it have to be the same sharp claws as the monkey-tail brown bear? Is it really a coincidence? Therefore, after careful consideration, Zhen Jin felt that the possibility of the first transformation potion was the most likely. The possibility of the second bloodline awakening was not impossible, but the probability was relatively small. Then, this brought about a whole new problem. Is there still the magic of the monkey-tail brown bear in my body? This magic, is it still eroding me? The consequences of magic erosion were very serious. Different bloodlines could not coexist peacefully. If a human nobleman had two bloodlines in his body, basically one high and one low, one strong and one weak. In the subsequent process of cultivation, the higher bloodline would become stronger and stronger, and eventually the lower and weaker bloodline would be expelled. If both bloodlines were high and unwilling to give up, then it would be more troublesome. They would have to cultivate a specific chi technique and pay attention to the balance of these two bloodlines. The balance could be with one bloodline as the main and the other as a supplement. It could also be with the two bloodlines maintaining the same strength. Once the balance was broken, there would be a violent conflict between the bloodlines, and the extraordinary person's fate would be worrying, either injured or dead. Bloodline determined aptitude, and aptitude was the key to mastering power in the future. The human race's pursuit of bloodline was always persistent and crazy. Noblemen would think of ways to marry strong people with high bloodlines, and the aristocrats would marry each other. The aristocrats' private lives were chaotic. In addition to personal lust, it was to create outstanding descendants of the family. Among all the races, the human race was good at reproduction, much better than the elves and dwarves in this aspect. But among the descendants of the aristocrats, those with outstanding aptitude would always be a minority. Moreover, the more powerful an individual was, the more difficult it was to reproduce. The price of reproduction was also very high. In addition to reproduction, humans also used other crooked methods. For example, using magic, making potions, creating a living environment, trading with demons, and so on, forcibly planting high bloodlines in the body. It was not impossible to forcibly mix in high bloodlines, and there were even many methods that could temporarily succeed. But the results were often very tragic. First of all, the human body mutated, producing a terrifying distortion. This kind of distortion was not only physical, but also mental. Many examples showed symptoms of madness, ravings, confusion, dementia, and so on. Secondly, the stability of the original life was completely broken, and the lifespan was extremely reduced, and the survival time was not long. Finally, there was the death of the soul. Zhen Jin had never heard of using external forces to obtain a bloodline and completely succeed. Bloodlines were so precious and crucial. High-grade bloodlines brought about outstanding aptitude. Outstanding aptitude, after the brewing of time, formed powerful strength. And strength meant power. The reason why the human aristocrats were aristocrats and could stand above the vast majority of their own race was precisely because of such a solid foundation. Bloodlines were the cornerstone and pride of the aristocrat's existence. When ZD was treating me, she unintentionally created a transformation potion. This transformation potion can change my hands into the sharp claws of wild beasts. This means that external forces mixed the bloodline of the monkey-tailed brown bear in my body. This kind of low-grade bloodline has a terrible influence on my aristocratic bloodline. If this influence is relatively high, my cultivation aptitude will also decrease because of it. The transformation potion could not be abused. The consequences of abuse were serious and the price was disastrous. Whether I am now a silver or gold, I am still very young, and the road ahead of me is very long. This is just the starting point, not the end. If my future is dim because of this transformation potion, the gains will not make up for the losses. Bronze, iron, silver, gold. Above them, there were legends and saints. Above the saints, there were even stronger, who did not want to become a legend, a saint, and even stronger. Zhenjin did not want to see his growth hindered because of the monkey-tailed brown bear's blood, reducing his own potential and hope, and causing his originally bright future to become dim. The feeling of emptiness I felt was due to the huge consumption of magic in my body. Then, does that mean that the monkey-tailed brown bear's magic has been used up? My hands mutated once before. Was it able to use up all of the corresponding magic? Now, are there any remnants in my body? After that, no matter how I tried, my hands could not mutate. Does this mean that the relevant magic in my body has been used up? Including this time, when I drank the potion, the foreign magic in my body was gathered into a ball, and then I vomited it out. The potion made by ZD targeted the magic of frost. Would it also be effective on the monkey-tail brown bear's magic? Maybe I should reveal everything and ask ZD to help me design a targeted vomit-inducing potion. Jinjin's thoughts were complicated. He was weak after all, and not long after, he fell asleep in the tent. Where's this? Am I dreaming? After an unknown amount of time, he found himself in a spacious place. In front of him, there was a long wooden table, and on the long table was a bow and arrow. 100 meters away, there were 3 archery targets. The wooden table was crudely made, and the style was rough. The archery targets were made of straw, and there was a round white cloth hanging from the head. There were many layers of concentric circles drawn on the white cloth, and the circle in the center was specially filled with red fuel. This was a shooting range used for archery practice. There were only 2 people in the shooting range. One was Zhenjin, and the other was a middle-aged man with a straight body, a slender beard, and a slightly raised face with a touch of aristocratic pride. Zhenjin recognized this middle-aged man. This was his father, and also the current patriarch of the 100 Needles family. Because of the fragmented memories, Zhenjin lacked feelings for the middle-aged man in front of him, but the memories of the previous scenes surfaced, and he learned of the close relationship between the two of them. "Father, I'm here at your call." Zhenjin found himself speaking. The patriarch of the 100 Needles family nodded slightly. "It's been a few days since you came back from the capital. I'm here to test whether you've slackened your training in the capital. This time, let's compete in archery. If you can beat me, I'll give you the swift wasp." Hearing this, Zhenjin's eyes suddenly lit up. The swift wasp was a flying mount. Although it could only fly about 3 meters above the ground, it was still priceless and rarely circulated on the market. In the Empire, only a few nobles had mastered the technology of breeding swift wasp. The 100 Needles family was one of them. But the next moment, Zhenjin heard himself say in a sad and hesitant tone, "But father, your arm." Zhenjin immediately understood that this scene should have happened not long after the battle between the patriarch of the 100 Needles family and Qin Ke. Zhenjin had more relevant memories, and he knew that his father, the patriarch of the 100 Needles family, was very powerful, but in the battle with Qin Ke, he was careless and had one of his arms cut off. Indeed, with only one arm left, how could the patriarch of the 100 Needles family shoot an arrow? The patriarch of the 100 Needles family didn't care at all. "It doesn't matter. You shoot first." Zhenjin picked up the longbow, skillfully knocked an arrow, and shot the head of the target with a whoosh. Maybe Zhenjin was in low spirits at that time, so he didn't hit the bullseye. Zhenjin put the longbow on the long table. It was the turn of the patriarch of the 100 Needles family. The patriarch of the 100 Needles family smiled and unbuttoned his clothes, revealing a hidden pocket inside his clothes. There were fine needles and threads in the pocket, and 10 long needles were densely arranged. These needles were of the same length, each about the length of an adult's index finger. They seemed to be made of crystal with a faint cloud-white color, and were not completely transparent. "Look carefully, my son. The patriarch of the 100 Needles family picked up one of the long white crystal needles with his index and middle fingers. The next moment, he activated his golden fighting spirit and infused it into the long white crystal needle. In an instant, the long white crystal needle flashed with a bright golden luster. The patriarch of the 100 Needles family faced the target and flicked his fingers gently. Whoosh! Suddenly, a sharp whistling sound that pierced through the air rang in Pin Jin's ears. At the same time, he saw the long golden needle passing through the air, leaving a bright light. The light stretched straight and hit the target. With a loud bang, the entire target was blown to pieces. "What's this?" Jin opened his mouth slightly, and his face was full of shock. The patriarch of the 100 Needles family explained with a smile, "There are many kinds of fighting skills, and some of them are called secret skills. What you see now is the secret skill passed down from generation to generation in the 100 Needles family. Roaring Needles. Do you want to learn it?" "Yes. Father, please enlighten me," Jin shouted. His spirit was obviously uplifted, and his previous depression and gloom were swept away. The patriarch of the 100 Needles family immediately imparted the skill and handed a long white crystal needle to Jin. Jin took the opportunity to observe it carefully. He couldn't help but think to himself, "This white crystal needle is unusual. It's at least a gold-level equipment." After that, Jin found that he had tried many times, but he didn't succeed. You've mastered the key, and you didn't make any mistakes in the process. It's not surprising that you didn't succeed. The middle-aged aristocrat explained, "The reason for your failure is that you have too little fighting spirit. Using the secret skill, Roaring Needles, consumes a lot of your fighting spirit. Even if you have a gold-level cultivation, you can only launch 10 needles in a row. According to your current total fighting spirit, you should be able to launch 1 needle if you inject all your fighting spirit." The patriarch of the 100 Needles family immediately estimated. Jin smiled bitterly. "Father, isn't it a little dangerous for me to use this secret skill?" He could only launch 1 needle if he exhausted all his fighting spirit. If this needle didn't hit the target when fighting with an enemy, Jin would be in a very difficult situation without the support of fighting spirit. The patriarch of the 100 Needles family gradually withdrew his smile, and his expression turned serious. He stared at Jin and said meaningfully, "My son, the reality is always cruel. Whether it's fighting or other aspects, you'll always be exposed to risks. Many times, you'll find that launching 1 needle with all your strength is the wisest choice. The feeling of emptiness and pain after exhausting all of the battle chi in the body is very unbearable. But sometimes we have to do this. Don't be afraid of risks, and don't be afraid of sacrifices." Chapter 33. Thud. With a soft sound, a dagger flew through the air, and the sharp tip of the dagger stabbed into the wooden stake. Jin slowly retracted his arm and looked at the wooden stakes in front of him thoughtfully. When he woke up this morning, he gave the order to collect many long-range weapons. Bows and crossbows were the most common ones. Other than that, there were also some that were specifically for throwing, such as flying axes and tridents. There were also some that could be thrown, such as short spears and daggers. Now, these weapons were all thrown out by him and accurately stabbed into wooden stakes of varying distances. Jin moved his fingers while looking at the results in front of him and secretly evaluated himself. Strictly speaking, daggers aren't specifically used for throwing, but I threw more than 10 daggers and didn't miss. Wherever you want to hit, you can hit it. Other than daggers, short spears, flying axes, and tridents are all the same. As for bows and crossbows, there was no need to even mention them. If I still had darts, I should be able to do the same. Darts were not common. In the eastern part of the Shungmain continent, there was a unique do-chi art that could make one as light as a swallow and use darts, flying daggers, and so on. Therefore, darts were more popular in the eastern part of the Shungmain continent, but they were very rare in other places. The results have proven that last night wasn't a dream, but a part of my memory has been recovered. This kind of throwing result could not be achieved by the previous Jinjun. But after one night, it was very easy for him to do it, as if it was instinctive. No, this should be the result of my hard work in the past. It's just that I haven't been able to use it. Last night's memory is the key. It's a pity that although I can recall the secret technique of rumbling needles, I can't use it. If I can use this secret technique, its power will be very impressive and will be a great threat to the ferocious monsters on the island. Zhenjin sighed inwardly. Until now, he was still unable to use his douqi. For a douqi technique like roaring needles, the main premise was that he had to imbue his douqi into the specially made flying needles. Therefore, Zhenjin couldn't use his fighting energy, so he couldn't bring out the true power of the sharp needles. But even so, with the emergence of this memory, Zhenjin's strength still leaped a little. In the past, he wielded a long sword and fought valiantly in close combat. But now, because he had the ability to throw, he could attack everything within a few hundred steps with him as the center. As expected of the 100 Needles bloodline, in terms of accuracy, the 100 Needle bloodline was among the top 5 in the entire Shengming continent. Lord Jinjin, you are the hope of the 100 Needles clan. You will surely bring glory back to the clan. Zhenjin, who was deep in thought, heard a familiar voice. He turned around and, as expected, saw Song Su. Song Su slowly walked over. When he saw the various throwing weapons on the wooden stakes, his face revealed a respectful expression. Zhenjin shook his head slightly. He came here early in the morning to practice, not only to confirm that this was a memory, but also to use this opportunity to trigger the relevant memory and understand how to use douqi. But unfortunately, he didn't succeed. In fact, before this, he had asked his subordinates about their douqi arts and secretly tried to use it. But no matter how hard he tried, this island prohibited all low-level magic in douqi, so he couldn't sense anything and couldn't stimulate the douqi hidden in his body. He wouldn't confide in Song Su about this. Tell me, what's the current situation? Zhenjin stood in place and watched Song Su walk in front of him, adjusting his breathing as he asked. Song Su obviously came to report the situation to him. Sir, no one died. Song Su's first sentence made Zhenjin sigh in relief. Song Su continued, we are really lucky to have a pharmacist like ZD. These potions have benefited almost everyone. So far, more than half of the people have taken the potions. These people are very weak. Some are in a coma, some are feverish, and some are seriously ill. The potions have been made, and there were enough of them. But for safety and stability, under Song Su's arrangement, the exploration team members took the potions in batches. So far, there were still some people who hadn't taken the potions. Zhenjin nodded slightly and asked the key question. Then, to what extent has the physical fitness of the first batch of people who took the potions declined? Song Su shook his head slightly. The situation is still developing, but as far as the current results are concerned, these people are very weak, and the extent of the decline in strength varies from person to person. Some people are milder, while others are more serious. Overall, the situation is quite good. At least there are no disabilities or cripples. At this point, Song Su's face darkened slightly. Sir, I think the danger of magic power erosion has been basically resolved, and it is no longer a threat to our entire team. But there's another problem in front of us. Food. Jin Zhen's eyes flashed with a touch of understanding. Sir, Song Su bowed slightly, unable to hide his worry. We really don't have much food left. Jin nodded slightly. He had been paying attention to supplies for a long time, so he wasn't surprised. Back then, Song Su proposed to hunt a large number of goats in order to obtain mutton. Whether it was the exploration team or the large group of people who stayed on the beach, they all had a great need for food. The exploration team had originally brought plenty of food, but they had left the beach and entered the jungle for a long time. Most of the food had been consumed. Zhenjin and ZD originally had plenty of food on them, but this abundance was only for the two of them. Now that the number of people had soared, everyone's food immediately became scarce. Unless Zhenjin decided to abandon this group of people and preserve the food first. How long can it last? Zhenjin continued to ask. The scholar immediately replied, roughly calculated, it can last for 15 days. Half a month's time. Jinjin nodded. He was satisfied with Song Su's report. This is the role of an aide. Song Su is a qualified aide. He can detect problems in advance and warn us. Many things seem very small and trivial. As a leader, it is difficult to take care of everything. At this time, someone needs to check and fill in the gaps. 15 days seems to be a long time, but it is already on the alert line. A sense of urgency rose in Zhun Jin's heart. He had experienced danger on this island for many days and deeply understood how difficult it was to obtain food on this island. Song Su must have felt it too, because after he joined the exploration team, he had also experienced many hardships and dangers. Not once had he been able to harvest food on a large scale. His only chance was to hunt a flock of goats. In the end, there was a big problem with the mutton, and it almost caused the entire exploration team to perish. Do you have any good ideas? Jinjin thought for a while and asked Song Su. Song Su said in a low voice, I am ashamed that I can't do anything about this. But perhaps Lady ZD has some ideas? Hearing this, Zhun Jin's heart suddenly moved slightly. He took a deep look at Song Su. A thought rose in the young man's mind. Song Su's words have a meaning. Could it be that he saw something? That's true. The secret of the grassroots is actually very difficult to hide. Maybe it can deceive others, but Song Su had been paying attention to it all the time. He is very knowledgeable, so it is quite normal for him to see through this secret. After ZD found out that the goats were also victims and the real source was the seemingly ordinary grass, she told Jinjin to keep it a secret. Zhun Jin's thoughts kept turning. According to this fact, there is the simplest way to solve the food problem. That is to let ZD concoct more potions and feed them to the goats. After the goats spit out the chaos magic power, wouldn't the mutton be edible? Song Su's suggestion just now seemed to point to this method, but he didn't say it clearly. After all, this unique grass root contains rich ice magic power. This is a superior resource and a secret that any force would want to carefully conceal. Old Mr. Song Su is probably pretending to be confused. He really is someone who has served the nobles for most of his life. Thinking like this, Zhun Jin couldn't help but admired Song Su even more. What he admired most about Song Su was that the old man knew how to restrain his cleverness and not let his wisdom offend others. He put forward his suggestions at the right time and with a sense of propriety, so as not to easily arouse the disgust of others. But at the same time, he still adhered to his principles. Song Su knew that food was too important to the exploration team. At present, the team had plenty of water, and there was also a rare replenishment point nearby. Food was the key. Once there was a shortage of food, the energy that the human body could take in would decrease, and their physical strength would continue to decline. Their ability to resist external crises would also decrease. If there was no improvement, this vicious cycle would drag the entire team into the abyss of destruction. In fact, everyone knew about the food reserves. Once the reserves reached the warning line, the exploration team members would naturally feel psychological pressure. This psychological pressure would grow. It was very likely that there would be no need for any ferocious beast to attack. In order to compete for the only food, the team members would have internal strife and competition, and the team would collapse and disintegrate. Previously, there were only two people, Zhun Jin and ZD, who could meet the food needs. Now that there were more people, although it was more convenient in many aspects, it also brought a lot of pressure and trouble. Song Su was worried that Zhun Jin would be careless in this regard, and food was important, so he pointed out this problem. From his point of view, protecting the existence of the entire team was also protecting his own life and safety. Song Su was a scholar and did not cultivate battle chi. If he wanted to increase his chances of survival, he could only rely on others. At the same time, the more people there were in the team, the greater the value of his management and knowledge. Song Su knew how to survive. I really want to use such a talent for me. Zhun Jin sighed to himself. Although Song Su was only a mortal, he was knowledgeable, knew his limits, and had extraordinary wisdom. He's not suitable to be the butler of a noble. He's not a transcendent being at all. so he can't control the situation. But as a consultant, he's completely qualified, even outstanding. Song Su left the family that he had served for many years because he wanted to write a book. This is the intention of a scholar, so it's understandable. For ordinary people, staying by the side of the original noble was definitely the best choice. Why risk your life for the sake of a book? Thinking of this, Jean could not help but feel moved. Before this, I originally planned to use Song Su's intentions to slowly recruit him. But now that I think about it, the current situation might be a good opportunity to recruit him. Jean thought about it from a different perspective, and his eyes slowly lit up. In the past, he wanted to slowly scheme, but in the future, when he came to White Sand City, he would not be the only Holy Knight. There would be at least 2 other people who would be competitors for the position of City Lord. Therefore, the best opportunity was not the future, but the present. On this dangerous, strange island, Song Su had to rely on others to survive. So this island is actually my opportunity. For the first time, Jean felt that this island was cute. Chapter 34. Jean was not in a hurry to find ZD. He was followed by Song Su, and the 2 of them came to the camp together. There were many people lying here. They were all injured people who had just taken medicine recently and were weak all over. These people needed to be comforted. Sir, greetings, sir. Seeing the arrival of the paladin Jean, the injured people struggled to stand up and salute. Lie down. Jean stretched out his palm and made a downward motion. Don't worry, everyone. The flag of the Empire is still flying, and the gods of the Holy Temple are watching you and me. This setback is nothing. As long as you don't lose your life, everything is possible. Follow me. I will take you out of the island and gain glory. After Jean encouraged them, he walked out of the tent with Song Su. As long as you are here, the morale here will not collapse. You are the pillar in our hearts. Song Su sighed. Jean smiled. Song Su said with emotion. It was not pure flattery. Jean did have such an effect. This was a leader. This was one of the influences of the strong. Of course, the most important thing is my identity as a paladin. Jean knew very well. In the hearts of the people of the Empire, the status of the paladins had always been quite high. Walking out of the camp, Jean brought Song Su to a nearby hillside. Here, an extremely simple thatched hut was temporarily built. There was a fence around the thatched hut. In the fence, there were a few bonehorn goats. These goats used to be the leaders of the herd and had a bronze-level life, aura. During the week period of the exploration team's medicine, these goats would be isolated here. The person in charge of taking care of the goats was none other than Baya. This young man did not suffer from the corrosion of the chaos magic power because he did not eat mutton and avoided a disaster. Because of this, he had a nickname, the Lucky Boy. Baya the Lucky Boy was extremely busy these days. Not only did he have to take care of the sheep, but he also had to help the wounded. Many people were taken care of by him and received his kindness, which made him very popular. Among them, Huang Zhao had misunderstood Baya before. After being taken care of by Baya, Huang Zhao took the initiative to teach Baya battle chi technique. Noticing the arrival of Jean and Song Su, he hurriedly opened the gate and respectfully welcomed them in. My lord, I'm sorry. I failed to live up to your expectations. I didn't do it. Baya looked ashamed. Jean patted the young man's shoulder and comforted him. It's okay. I know you've worked hard. Although in terms of age, Jean was younger than Baya. But when Baya heard this, the tension and worry on his face immediately dissipated. His shame turned into gratitude towards Jean. Thank you, my lord, you're so magnanimous, Baya said. Jean waved his hand and motioned for Baya to leave. He originally ordered Baya to train these goats with the intention of taming them as mounts. If this plan succeeded, it would be of great help to Jean now and even in the future. Jean had always been thinking about the goat cavalry. The reason why this task was given to Baya was because he was alive and kicking and had not been corroded by the magic power. The second reason was that he was the son of a hunter and had dealt with many wild beasts. But now, it seemed that Bai could not tame these goats. Jinjin was not disappointed. He had little hope to begin with. Usually, this kind of thing was done by beast tamers or drool. Jinjin also knew that his idea was unrealistic to count on the son of a hunter and an ordinary young man at that. "My lord, I'll take my leave." Bai retreated. Soon, only Jinjin and Song Su were left in the fence. Jinjin then said, "Regarding the problem of food shortage, I already have a solution. That is to make a large amount of medicine and let the goats consume it. It will expel the magic power in their bodies and purify all the meat." Song Su heard this and hesitated for a moment before choosing his words carefully. "My lord, I'm afraid this method won't work. We can remove the magic power in our bodies because we are only corroded. However, these goats are the source of the magic power itself. The magic power is a part of their life, like their hands and feet or their internal organs. If we give the goats the medicine, although it will expel a large amount of the magic power in their bodies, there will always be some residual magic power that cannot be completely removed. At the same time, these goats will also suffer heavy injuries, far more serious than us. Death on the spot is the most likely outcome." Jinjin laughed and looked deeply at Song Su. "These goats are actually the same as us. They are all victims. The real source of the magic power is not them, but the seemingly ordinary grass growing nearby." Jinjin was so frank that Song Su was stunned on the spot. The old scholar looked at Jinjin, and their eyes met in midair. The old scholar blinked and suddenly understood the meaning of Jinjin's words. Jinjin continued, "Could it be that Mr. Song Su is not aware of this secret?" Song Su's heart trembled slightly. Jinjin's constant pressure gave him an illusion that he was facing a sharp swordsman with an endless offensive. The old scholar's face flashed with a touch of hesitation, and his eyes flickered as he replied, "This one is stupid and did not notice this secret." Jinjin stared at Song Su for a while, and seeing that the latter did not have any follow-up reaction, a feeling of disappointment rose in his heart. Jinjin replied with a faint He slowly turned around and strode towards the gate. Song Su followed closely behind. When Jinjin was about to open the gate, Song Su suddenly said, "Lord Jinjin, your frankness and foresight are admirable. You have the foresight of an excellent leader. Although you are now in a difficult situation, you are still trying to form a cavalry. Indeed, cavalry is very useful, both for offense and defense. With an excellent cavalry in hand, you will often be able to seize the initiative. However, in this one's opinion, these goats are not your best choice. You have a better choice." "Oh." Jinjin put one hand on the gate, slowly turned around, and looked back at Song Su. "Then let me listen to Mr. Song Su's opinion. My lord, although these goats have a high level of life, they are not natural products, hiding a huge hidden danger. They cannot coordinate their magic. Even if they form a cavalry, the upper limit is very low. In addition, my lord will be in charge of White Sand City in the future. The surrounding terrain of White Sand City is flat, and there is a vast forest in the direction of the wilderness. There are no hills, so it is not suitable for the goat cavalry to display their power." Song Su spoke with assurance. Jinjin's face was expressionless, but in his heart, he agreed with Song Su's words. Jinjin was clear about these problems, but the key was, other than forming the goat cavalry, what else could he form? Jinjin was now poor. Although he was a dignified temple knight, even his subordinates were only recently recruited. Moreover, once these people left this island in the future, whether they were willing to continue following Jinjin was another matter. Song Su suddenly asked, "How much do you know about the exploding horse, my lord? It sounds familiar." Jinjin frowned slightly, thought for a moment, and suddenly said, "Dukung Le." When Dukung Le was young, he was a famous hedonistic son. His parents died in his early years, and he was deeply doted on by his ancestors. He indulged in sensual pleasures, but his strength was not good. However, the eastern nobles rebelled, and his ancestors were ambushed and killed on the battlefield. As a result, Hung Lu rose to the position and became the patriarch. Before he could react, the allied army of the nobles had already launched a mighty attack. Hung Lu did not even have time to grieve. Under the support of the family knights, he became the commander and led the army to resist the allied army. The two armies fought. The knights of the Hung Lu family fought bravely to protect their home, but they were powerless. They were at a disadvantage and fell into a predicament. Seeing that the situation was about to collapse, the timid Hung Lu decided to secretly escape to save his life. But in his panic, he did not recognize the horse clearly and mistakenly got on an exploding horse. The exploding horse was impulsive and even crazy. Once provoked, it would fight back with all its might, even if it lost its life. As Hung Lu urged his horse to escape, a bullet accidentally hit the butt of his mount. The exploding horse was furious. It did not care about Hung Lee's shouts and pulled reins. It turned around and charged into the bitter battlefield where the army was entangled. The originally low morale of the family army suddenly saw the current Duke Hung Lee's one-man charge. They were immediately infected by his spirit and roared. Their morale soared, and they launched a fierce counterattack without regard for their lives. The allied army was caught off guard, and their front line collapsed, becoming the defeated side. Hung Lu won a crucial victory by accident and protected his family's territory. This story about him was revealed 6 years later when he was drunk. As a result, it was widely known throughout the world. Song Su nodded. It is the kind of horse that Duke Hung Lu rode in the past. I know a method to nurture exploding horse cavalry. When Jin Jin heard this, he could not help but reveal a shocked expression. Are you sure? The exploding horse had a wild temperament and would easily fall into a state of anger. Just the slightest provocation would cause it to attack crazily. But apart from that, the exploding horse's body was very sturdy. It was very tall, and its head was about a meter taller than most war horses. Its hooves were thicker and harder than most war horses, as if they were made of steel. Its explosive power was very strong. Once it started running, it would only take a few breaths to reach its fastest speed. Not only was it good for short distances, it also had considerable stamina for long-distance attacks. Jin Jin was a temple knight. Although his memories were incomplete, he had common sense. He deeply understood how important a good mount was to a knight and how much it would increase their fighting strength. The height of the exploding horse allowed a knight to fight from a high vantage point. On the battlefield, a slight advantage could lead to the difference between life and death. The height advantage brought by the exploding horse was more than just a slight advantage. The hooves of the exploding horse were also very powerful weapons. Excellent cavalry could make the war horse stand up and use its front hooves to kick the enemy. With a stomp of the exploding horse's hooves, it could kick through a normal iron shield. Not to mention the muscles all over the exploding horse's body, bringing about a terrifying collision force. Such excellent qualities made many nobles or leaders of forces try to form exploding cavalry. However, the performance of this kind of cavalry on the battlefield had always been terrible. This was because the cavalry had no way to control these exploding horses. Especially when these exploding horses were provoked, they would ignore the restraints of the cavalry and charge towards the enemy with all their might. The exploding cavalry was too easy to mobilize. With a little provocation, the cavalry would rush in front of them and enter the range of the mages. Under the bombardment of magic, the exploding horse led the cavalry to their deaths without any fear. If they encountered a slightly more cunning enemy leader, this cavalry would be mobilized to attack their own front line and become a chess piece in the hands of the enemy. The exploding horse had many advantages, but there was a huge flaw, causing the exploding cavalry to gradually become a laughingstock. But now, Song Su proposed to Jin Jin to form the exploding cavalry. Jin Jin stared at Song Su with a sharp gaze. Although they had only known each other for a short period of time, he did not believe that Song Su was a person who did not know his limits. Sure enough, Song Su added in the next moment, I have a way to allow the cavalry to control the irritable, exploding horse. The reason why the exploding horse can't form a cavalry is because their temperament is too explosive. But with this method, we can make up for this flaw. It's just that the current douchi art is still in its infancy and is not mature, let alone perfect. If you don't mind, I am willing to offer it to you with both hands. Junjin withdrew his gaze and nodded. Mr. Tsang-su, I will remember your contribution. The relationship between the cavalry and their mounts was not just a simple riding relationship. In addition to spending time with their mounts and training together to cultivate tacit understanding, the cavalry would also use do-chi to instill it into their mounts. The do-chi shuttled through the body of the mount, causing it to move faster, have stronger defense, recover faster, have greater strength, and so on. When a cavalry charged, the do-chi would cause the cavalry and their mounts to be more closely connected, thus forming a whole. According to Tsang-su, he had mastered a do-chi art that had just been created. Using this do-chi, the cavalry could effectively control the exploding horse and would not easily cause the latter to go crazy. The value of this do-chi art was, of course, very high. Tsang-su continued, Lord Junjin, although these goats have a strong life force, they are still monsters in the end. They cannot automatically coordinate their magic and make the magic in their bodies balanced and stable. This also means that the cavalry cannot instill do-chi into the goats' bodies. Even if they become cavalry, they do not have much potential, and there are many hidden dangers. It's better to use drugs to remove the chaotic magic in their bodies than directly kill them to obtain a large amount of food and solve the problem in front of us. Although the processed mutton might still have magic left, there is still a risk. But in the current situation, what else could the entire exploration team ask for? P.S. I recommend a good book, Legendary Mechanic. The mechanical setting is novel, and the atmosphere is relaxed and happy. Han Xiao, Galaxy's hardcore leveler, was thrown into the Transmigration Army by a mysterious force from the east, brought along with the player interface to become an NPC, returned to the open beta of Galaxy, and resolutely chose the mechanic class, which was the most difficult class. Battleships lined up and traversed the Sea of Stars. Star mechas were like dragons. Psionic cannons could destroy the world, and an endless mechanical army quietly waited in the portable warehouse. One person was an army. Chapter 35. Food was very important. A lack of food would cause the entire exploration team to fall into a desperate situation. Even just the pressure of a lack of food could cause the entire team to panic and fall into chaos. After discussing with Tsang-su, Junjin went to ZD's tent alone. The size of this tent was second only to Junjin's. There were no guards outside the tent. Junjin originally wanted to arrange some people for ZD, but ZD made it clear that she did not need them. She had her own defensive measures. ZD had already gone to bed. The amount of work required to make medicine for the entire team was too much. The process was also very troublesome, and she was exhausted. Junjin paced outside the tent. Although the problem was serious, Junjin did not want to disturb ZD. Just let her rest. While Junjin was thinking, ZD, who was sleeping soundly in the dim tent, gently twitched her nose and then slowly opened her eyes. Is it sir? ZD's voice came from a tent. Junjin had just turned around and was about to leave when he heard this voice. He immediately turned around. It's me. There are some things I need to discuss with you. Rustling sounds came from a tent. Soon, Junjin saw that ZD was already dressed neatly. She opened the tent curtain and personally welcomed him. Sir, please come in. ZD welcomed Junjin into the tent. Junjin directly stated his intentions. ZD shook her head. I'm very sorry. This time, I will have to disappoint you. Although sir's method is feasible, I need a key material to make the medicine. And I've almost used up all of this material. I only have a little left in case of any accidents. What kind of material is this? Can you find it here? Junjin was unwilling to give up. ZD shook her head with a distressed expression. Perhaps this material grows somewhere on this island. But I don't have any clues. Moreover, even if we have such materials and make enough medicine, it's not worth it to use it on the sheep. Because if we do that, we will expose the secret of the grass. With the help of the potion, the flock of sheep would be cleansed of the chaos mana within their bodies, and others would understand that the flock of sheep was also a victim. The real source of magic, the green grass, was exposed. The grass here was a magic plant, and after plucking it, it was far easier to transport than mutton. Zhenjin, I've already told this secret to Tsang Su. ZD was stunned for a moment before she understood. My lord, you did the right thing. Tsang Su is indeed a rare talent. He might have discovered this secret long ago, but he didn't reveal it. This proves that he is quite intelligent. Or perhaps he didn't discover this secret, but since you've told him such an important secret, he must have understood your sincerity in treating him as one of your own. Congratulations, sir, for recruiting such an excellent consultant. Zhenjin, however, shook his head and told ZD what happened next. ZD was quite surprised. It was actually such a battle energy technique. She immediately frowned and said with a worried tone, My lord, if such a battle energy technique is given away so easily, I'm afraid its value won't be too high. Mr. Tsang Su himself is a scholar, not a beast tamer. The most important thing is that he doesn't have extraordinary power. If this battle energy technique is very valuable, he can definitely exchange it with other nobles for more benefits. Zhenjin, however, had a different opinion. Tsang Su doesn't seem like a person who doesn't know the importance of things. He does things with a sense of propriety. He understands the value of these grasses, so the battle energy technique he gave out is at least of the same value. This is the bargaining chip he used to retain his freedom and refuse my offer. But this way, he's more important to me. At this point, Zhenjin smiled slightly. Zhenjin asked ZD about the problem of food shortage. ZD didn't have any good ideas. She only said, This island is very large and full of danger, but it also contains rich resources. We can only look around as we go. Perhaps we can find a better source of food than a flock of sheep. Moreover, before looking for Sir, we set up a few camps along the way and stored some supplies in the camps. If we can find our way here and obtain these supplies, we can also alleviate the food shortage problem. Zhenjin nodded and prepared to leave with a slight disappointment. Just as he raised the curtain, Zhenjin's face flashed with a hint of hesitation. But in the end, he turned his head and asked, ZD, do you still have the blood of the brown bear from before? Although he asked this, Zhenjin didn't have much hope. The brown bear's blood contained magic and was a magic material. But the magic in the blood would quickly dissipate with time. It wasn't easy to preserve it, and the cost of preserving it was very high. But ZD's response surprised Zhenjin. She really did have some brown bear's blood. Get to me, Zhenjin said. ZD didn't ask anything. She directly opened the small leather bag at her waist and handed a few glass bottles to Zhenjin. Zhenjin held the reagent bottle containing the brown bear's blood and left ZD's tent. He was the strongest in the whole team. Now that there was a shortage of food, almost everyone else would be weakened by taking potions. Zhenjin hadn't been able to use his qi. In this case, the ability to mutate his hands into sharp claws became Zhenjin's strongest move. According to my previous guess, if I drink the brown bear's blood, I can replenish the corresponding magic in my body. It's very likely to reproduce the original mutation. Holding the glass bottle in his hand, Zhenjin thought to himself. His eyes were firm, and he said to himself, Of course, I won't drink this blood unless it's absolutely necessary. The chaotic foreign magic would erode his body and reduce his potential. But as the 100 Needles Patriarch said in his memory, sometimes you can't be afraid of risks, and you can't be afraid of sacrifices. Early morning, white mist lingered between the towering trees. Green moss and various bright-colored mushrooms adorned the woodland. An orange fawn was looking for food in the forest. It saw a low bush and was about to approach it. Suddenly, a series of hurried sounds came from bush. Squeak, 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 the fawn was frightened. It turned around like lightning and quickly left. After a few breaths, the squeaking sounds were getting closer and closer, mixed with people's shouts. Chase! Don't let these flying squirrels escape. Use the crossbow. Use the crossbow quickly. The sound was getting louder and louder. Then 3 flying squirrels squeaked and jumped directly into the bushes to escape. The pursuers behind them were hindered by the bushes and had to slow down. They watched the flying squirrels disappear into the forest. What a pity. Alas, we still didn't catch up. The leaders of the pursuers were the 2 brothers, Lan Zhao and Huang Zhao. Huang Zhao was unwilling to give up and wanted to chase, but he was stopped by Lan Zhao. Have you forgotten Lord Jinjin's order? Don't get separated from the main group. We're already far away from Lord Jinjin. I just want to get more food. These flying squirrels are very big. Their meat is safe, and they're very fat. Huang Zhao sighed. The exploration team didn't have much food left. This invisible pressure was already weighing on everyone's heart. But thinking of Zhun Jin's order, Huang Zhao could only grit his teeth and give up. When the pursuers returned to the team, they saw that Bai Ye and the others had already begun to deal with the flying squirrels' corpses on the spot. They skinned, cut, cleaned, and then smoked them. More than 10 days had passed. ZD had made enough potions to solve the magic corrosion in the bodies of the exploration team members. After resting on the spot for a few days, Zhun Jin led the group and set off. This team had gone through the crisis of the poison, and almost everyone's quality and combat strength had declined. However, they had gone through the same difficulties together, so they were closer and had a tacit understanding. In the following journey, they encountered several crises one after another. Every time, Jin Zhun stepped forward bravely and repelled the invading demonic beasts with a united will. I'm sorry, Lord Jinjin. We only killed 2 flying squirrels. Huang Zhao walked in front of Jinjin and reported in shame. Zhun Jin nodded and ordered, leave these to Bai Ye and the others. Not everyone was proficient in dealing with the corpses of magical beasts. Bai Ye, on the other hand, was the son of a hunter. He had received this kind of training since he was young and was very familiar with it. The mutton poisoning incident made this young man stand out. He had the nickname of Lucky Boy. Almost the entire exploration team had been taken care of by him. Because he was diligent, enthusiastic, and pure, he was very popular. Huang Zhao carried the 2 flying squirrels and walked to Bai Ye's side. Bai Ye was dealing with the flying squirrels. The flying squirrels under his knife had been skinned and its internal organs cleaned. Bai Ye was trying to cut off the flying squirrels' necks with his knife. After several slashes, the bones in the necks were still not completely broken. Hey, Lucky Boy, use this. Huang Zhao smiled and handed Bai Ye a knife. One could tell at a glance that this knife was crudely made. The handle was only slightly polished wood. The blade was inserted into the handle and wrapped with hemp rope and other things as much as possible to fix it. However, the blade was ferocious and flashed with a sharp cold light. It was like steel but not steel, like iron but not iron. It was one of the limbs of the blade spider. Of course, this weapon belonged to Jin Jin. However, after the poisoning incident, the entire exploration team's combat strength had declined. In order to increase his combat strength as much as possible, Zhun Jin selectively lent some of the blade weapons to his subordinates. Bai Ye took the knife. It was his first time touching it. His first impression was that it was light and not as heavy as he had imagined. Bai Ye aimed at the flying squirrel's neck and slashed down. Immediately, a cold light flashed past his eyes, and the stubborn flying squirrel's bones were broken into 2. Bai Ye immediately revealed a look of shock. Previously, he had cut the bones as if he was cutting iron. After several slashes, his hands had gone numb and he had not succeeded. Now that he used this knife, he felt as if he was cutting a piece of bread. It was too easy. Amazing. Bai Ye looked at the knife and praised from the bottom of his heart. Of course. After all, this is a silver-level magical beast. Huang Zhao smiled. Bai Ye shook his head. No, I mean Lord Jinjin. That silver-level blade spider must be very terrifying. But Sir defeated it, as expected of a holy knight. As Bai Ye spoke, the admiration and respect in his heart were revealed on his face. Huang Zhao chuckled and agreed. Yes, to be able to meet Lord Jinjin is really our fortune. Not to mention other things, just the group of flying squirrels we encountered just now Lord Jinjin's dagger was 100% hit. Most of the flying squirrels were killed by Sir. Wait, with this knife, I can deal with the corpse of the flying squirrel leader. Baya thought of something and ran to another place with a face full of excitement. The corpse of the flying squirrel leader emitted a bronze-level life aura. However, this aura was rapidly weakening and would completely disappear in less than half a day. There was a dagger in the eye socket of the flying squirrel leader. This was a fatal wound, and it was the work of Jinjin. Baya held the spider blade tightly and slowly aimed at the right place. He used force to cut and quickly peeled off the flying squirrel's fur. The skin of the flying squirrel leader was very tough. Ordinary iron swords could not cut it open, but under the spider blade, everything was easily solved. Baya was cutting open the abdomen of the flying squirrel leader when his hand suddenly stopped. "What's wrong?" Huang Zhao asked. Baya said uncertainly, "The meat of this flying squirrel leader seems different from the other flying squirrels." Huang Zhao glanced at it. "There's no difference." "No." Baya's face was serious. He first returned the knife to Huang Zhao, then squatted on the ground and pressed on it. He then searched around the internal organs and bones of the flying squirrel. After that, Baya's tone became more certain than before. "There are indeed many minute differences. I should bring this to Sir Song-Su first." That's a good idea. Huang Zhao agreed. Chapter 36. Song-Su, the old scholar, was very knowledgeable and had a broad vision. He could often see many things from the corpses of magical beasts. Before Jinjin took over the leadership of the expedition, Song-Su had relied on this to provide great help to the expedition. Song-Su had already seen the corpses of the ordinary flying squirrels, but he had specially instructed them to report to him immediately if they discovered anything unusual after dissecting the leader of the flying squirrels. "My lord," Baya soon brought the corpse of the leader of the flying squirrels to Song-Su. "Oh, it's Baya." Song-Su nodded, and then his gaze shifted to the corpse of the leader of the flying squirrels that Baya was carrying. "My lord, please take a look. Maybe I'm too nervous, but there's something different about it." Baya showed the corpse of the leader of the flying squirrels to Song-Su for a closer look. Song-Su observed for a moment, and his expression gradually became serious. "Baya, you've done well," Song-Su praised, reaching out to lift the corpse of the leader of the flying squirrels. Although he had lifted it, the old scholar soon sighed and put it back on the ground. The old scholar's body was weak to begin with, and he had also suffered from the corrosion of the magic power. Although the poison had been neutralized, his body was still greatly damaged. "Take it and report to the Lord Jinjin with me," Song-Su said to Baya. "Yes, my lord." Baya immediately accepted the order. In the tent, Jinjin was discussing the matter of the crossbow with ZD. Because of the corrosion of the magic power, the actual combat power of the entire expedition has decreased significantly. With no outsiders present, Jinjin appeared to be very worried. It was already quite difficult to explore this island in the first place. Now, the risk we have to take is even greater. ZD muttered, "Lord Jinjin, we've already done our best. For the time being, this is the best the expedition can do. That is, unless you use a mid-grade or high-grade magic potion, or the corresponding magic, divine arts, and so on. However, in the current situation, we are unable to produce any high-grade magical potions. And I don't approve of it either, because it's not worth it. Regardless of whether it's a mid-grade or high-grade magic potion or equivalent magic or divine arts, the cost is very high. Even if there are 2 bronze-ranked elites among them, it's not worth it just to save these ordinary people." After pausing for a moment, Purple Stem added, "In fact, magic power erosion has many side effects. For example, there are all kinds of strange and even incurable chronic diseases, as well as reduced lifespan and so on." Jinjin sighed. "Let's not think about that for now. Right now, I just want to replenish my combat strength. Do you think we can make crossbows?" In the past few days, Jinjin had fully experienced the benefits of long-range attacks. For example, the leader of the flying squirrels not long ago was a bronze-level magical beast. But under the dagger that Zhun Jin threw out, it was killed in one blow. With the death of the leader of the flying squirrels, the swarm of flying squirrels that came attacking immediately fell into chaos. Thus, the expedition seized the opportunity and obtained a great victory with no casualties. ZD considered her tone and said seriously, "Sir, your thinking is very correct. As long as we increase our long-range power, we can replenish our combat strength to a large extent and also conserve our strength and reduce the possible casualties. However, I'm afraid we are still unable to make it at the moment. First, we don't have a crossbow craftsman. The structure of a crossbow is very simple, but to make it, it requires mature skills. We are all amateurs. Second, we don't have a blacksmith. A truly powerful crossbow uses steel plates as the crossbow arm, and the weight of the pulled string will be very high. At the same time, the structure of the crossbow mechanism is very delicate and requires metal springs. These all require blacksmiths to make. Excellent crossbows also have mechanical devices to assist in pulling the string. Even the Empire is unable to mass-produce such devices. Every year, they purchase them on a large scale from the goblins of the lava continent. Scholars were not necessarily magicians, but every magician was a scholar. ZD was the current president of the Wisteria Chamber of Commerce, and the arms business was usually the most profitable business. Thus, she was very familiar with crossbows. However, Zhun Jin did not give up so easily. He still insisted, "I don't plan to use steel plates as crossbow arms. I only want wooden planks. We can tear the dried bark and make hemp rope. This way, we will have a bowstring. Actually, we still have a lot of magical beast tendons. Although the weight of the crossbow made this way will be much lower, it will be easier to wind. It can be done with just manpower. The only thing that can be a hindrance is the crossbow mechanism. The mechanism of the crossbow is very delicate and requires specific metal parts to be made. The most difficult part is still the springs." ZD, you're right. We don't have a blacksmith. However, we have very few people and do not need a blacksmith to mass produce. I only need you to use a potion to corrode the specific metal parts and springs. Zhun Jin was also very familiar with crossbows. Although he did not recover the relevant memories, he had a lot of common sense. In fact, the Temple Knights were equipped with crossbows. These crossbows were small in size and were specifically used by the knights on horseback. ZD sighed, "I'm sorry, sir. I don't have any potion that can corrode specific metal parts. I don't have such a special potion with me. However, if I gather the necessary materials, I can still make it on the spot. However, magical beasts with corrosive acid are not easy to deal with. It is very likely to cause a lot of casualties to the entire team. There's also one more thing that I want to remind you to pay more attention to." At this point, ZD subconsciously lowered her voice. If Sir's plan is carried out smoothly and almost everyone in the team has a crossbow, then the team will not be easy to control and will become very dangerous. Zhun Jin's pupil shrank. ZD's warning was very correct. Zhun Jin immediately recalled the scene of Huang Zhao escaping. You can't overestimate people, but you can't underestimate them either. Zhun Jin muttered in his heart. People's hearts were unpredictable. In the face of his savior, Huang Zhao escaped with the dagger, whether it was intentional or not. And on this island, danger lurked everywhere. What kind of extreme situation would happen in the future? Now it seemed that these people supported Zhun Jin as their leader. But what if something extreme happened? For example, if everyone fled together under the pursuit of magical beasts, in order to escape, would someone use the crossbow in their hand to shoot their companions so that they could use their companions as bait to slow down the pursuit of the magical beasts? Especially in this kind of environment, low-level magic and Do-Chi could not be used. Whether it was Zhun Jin or ZD, they were both very weak. A sharp sword or a flying arrow could kill them both. People had fatal weaknesses. These members of the exploration team were not soldiers of the Hundred Needles family, and the cultivation of loyalty often took time. Zhun Jin was not a person who did not listen to advice. If the crossbow is not enough, then we can only try to use a bow. A longbow is definitely not enough. This kind of bow is very inconvenient in the dense forest, and the requirements for archers are also very high. A short bow can be made. It is more convenient to make than a crossbow, but also needs some training. The first thing to do in long-range attacks was to be accurate. But Jinjin suddenly grasped the long-range attack ability because of the emergence of memories, which was difficult to replicate. The members of the exploration team could not master the bow and arrow, except for Baya. He was the son of a hunter, and using the bow and arrow was one of his means of making a living. If there were enough people, Zhun Jin could choose an expert archer and form a special archer team. But now there was a serious shortage of archers. The main purpose of forming a bow and arrow team was to protect these people and minimize casualties as much as possible. Wood is everywhere here. It is not difficult to make a short bow. If one person's accuracy is not enough, the team can shoot together to form a barrage to make up for the lack. We still have to do assault training, otherwise we can't even form a barrage of arrows. But to train, we need enough food. Jinjin began to feel a faint headache. Drawing the bowstring consumed a lot of energy, and the higher the weight of the bow, the more so. Many crossbows require mechanical devices. Otherwise, it would be impossible to draw the bowstring by relying on manpower alone. When shooting an arrow, one needed to aim, and it required a period of time to maintain the bow in a strongly bent state, which also consumed a lot of energy. The greater the energy consumption, the greater the demand for food. Without food to supplement, rashly training was definitely asking for trouble. Therefore, the problem came down to food. And the shortage of food was already the most serious problem at the moment. While Jinjin was distressed, Song Su and Baya asked for an audience. The two of them brought the body of the flying squirrel leader. "We have some unexpected discoveries, sir." Song Su's tone was serious. Zhun Jin's gaze subconsciously turned to the body of the flying squirrel leader. "Did you find a magic crystal?" "No." Song Su gestured to Baya. After seeing Zhun Jin nod, Baya placed the body of the flying squirrel leader on the table. Song Su then instructed Baya to pry open the wound on the body of the flying squirrel leader, revealing the vivid muscle texture. "Lord Jinjin, Lady ZD, please look here." Song Su pointed at the muscle texture. ZD took a look and immediately frowned slightly. It is indeed a little different from ordinary magical beasts. Jinjin had also noticed that the muscles of magical beasts were usually bundled together as a whole. However, the muscles of the flying squirrel leader were divided into many fine muscle sheets. The muscle sheets were closely arranged like fish scales and were very neat. "Look here." Song Su continued to show the internal organs of the flying squirrel leader. Zhun Jin and ZD also noticed that the surface of the internal organs was covered with a layer of white, fascia-like material that was relatively thick. ZD was puzzled. This is indeed different from ordinary magical beasts. But what does this different structure mean? Although ZD was a magus, she was not as knowledgeable as Song Su in this aspect. Zhun Jin's common sense did not allow him to understand the old scholar's intentions. Song Su saw the puzzled expressions on their faces and explained, "I strongly suspect that this flying squirrel leader can release strong electric currents." "Oh, why do you say that?" Zhun Jin was puzzled. "There are rats that can release electric currents?" Baya's mouth was agape. Song Su continued to explain, "There is a special type of fish that lives and breeds at the bottom of the sea or in large rivers. People call them electric eels. The body structure of this fish is very similar to that of the flying squirrel leader. When they want to release an electric current, all the muscles in their body will move rhythmically and release a terrifying electric shock that can kill an elephant instantly. However, they also have insulating fascias in their bodies that can protect themselves from electric shocks. Then why didn't this flying squirrel leader release electric shocks earlier?" Baya asked. Song Su shook his head slightly. "This electric shock is not magic. It comes from a unique structure of life. Magic is a magus using his own spirit and using the elements to create something out of nothing. The electric eel is because of its unique organ structure. It is like being able to make sounds after having a throat and being able to fly after having wings. Electric eels can at most produce electric currents, but they can't control the direction of the currents. However, electric eels live in water. Once a strong electric current is produced, the underwater life forms near it will suffer terrifying electric shocks. For the flying squirrel leader, even if it produces electric currents, it has to look at its surroundings. Trees, earth, and air are often strong obstacles to electric currents. Therefore, only when the flying squirrel leader comes into contact with an enemy will its electric shock ability be exposed. However, because the dagger that Lord Jinjin threw out earlier killed it in midair, this ability was temporarily concealed. I see. Baya was enlightened. ZD narrowed her eyes slightly. Therefore, if we have to face these flying squirrel leaders in the future, iron armor will be their weakness. It's best to wear thick leather armor. Song Su shook his head. Leather armor can't provide enough protection. Their faces are usually exposed. Also, flying squirrels have very sharp claws and teeth. They can release electricity after tearing through leather armor. Junjin nodded. Therefore, the best way to deal with these flying squirrel leaders is to attack them from afar. However, we don't have enough archers. Although Jinjin could throw accurately, he couldn't kill them in one blow so smoothly every time. He wasn't someone's babysitter, and subordinates weren't meant to be protected. Sir, Lan Zhao is here to report to you. At this moment, a voice came from outside the tent. Lan Zhao was a bronze-ranked elite, so Jinjin had sent him to scout the surroundings. Jinjin called Lan Zhao into the tent and found that the latter was full of joy. Sir, good news. I found a gathering place of flying squirrels not far ahead. These flying squirrels have dug holes in the trunks of large trees to build nests. I did a rough count and found that there are many holes in the trees. This group of flying squirrels is very large, with close to 1,000 of them. If we take them down, we can greatly replenish our food supply. Song Su muttered. It seems that these flying squirrels' social nature hasn't changed. Oh. Jinjin raised his eyebrows slightly and subconsciously looked at ZD. ZD knew what Jinjin meant and immediately said, I've already tested it. There's no problem with the meat of ordinary flying squirrels. Of course, the meat of the leader of the flying squirrels is definitely not to be eaten carelessly. Baya exclaimed, hunting such a large group of flying squirrels is very dangerous. Lan Zhao glared at Baya, then looked at Jinjin and volunteered to take the lead in attacking the flying squirrels. Song Su shook his head. Lan Zhao, you're underestimating these flying squirrels. A bronze-ranked flying squirrel leader can release electric shocks. With such a large group, it's very likely that they have a dark iron-ranked flying squirrel leader. What? Lan Zhao was stunned. Jinjin fell into deep thought. He realized that he was facing a difficult choice. But at the moment, Jinjin couldn't make a decision. I need to consider this matter carefully. All of you are dismissed and go about your own business. Yes, sir. No matter what decision you make, I'll support you. ZD was the last to leave the tent, leaving behind these words. Chapter 37. The night was dark, and the bonfire brought light to the camp. From time to time, the crackling sound of burning branches could be heard, accompanied by sparks flying into the sky. This camp was not sturdy. Although a fence was hastily set up, it was too short, and the fence was too short. Its defense against the attacks of ferocious beasts was negligible. At most, it brought some psychological comfort to the members of the exploration team. The real defensive measures were the large number of traps scattered around the camp. Once a ferocious beast attacked, these traps could form an obstruction and create a loud noise to warn the people in the camp. Of course, there were also night guards around the camp to provide another layer of protection. In the past, most of the exploration team members had already fallen asleep at this time. However, no one was sleepy tonight. Many people surrounded the bonfire and chatted with each other. The news about the ability of the flying squirrel leader and the predicament of the exploration team facing a food shortage was known to everyone. What should we do in this situation? Food is the most important thing. Without food, We won't need any magical beasts. We'll all starve to death. No one is an exception because no one can go without food and drink. I think we should get rid of these flying squirrels. Even if the flying squirrel leader is very strong, most of the flying squirrels are just ordinary wild beasts. If you think like that, just wait for death. As long as the flying squirrel leader bites your flesh, you'll die with an electric discharge. Even if the flying squirrel leader is rare, we don't have many people. It's not enough for it to kill. Now that I think about it, it's really scary. During the day, the flying squirrel leader was only 5 steps away from me. Fortunately, it died in the hands of Lord Jinjin. Can the flying squirrel leader really discharge electricity? Some people expressed their doubts. However, when they heard that this was the result of Song Su's deduction, no one doubted it anymore. It seems that it's all thanks to Lord Jinjin. If he hadn't killed the flying squirrel leader in one strike, we would have definitely died. In my opinion, we definitely can't touch this kind of beast herd. Perhaps we'll be able to find a better source of food next. Therefore, it's better to take a detour. Or perhaps it's better to find the main group. Yeah, you're too naive. Will there definitely be food in the main group? Don't forget that we were sent out by the main force to explore the surroundings and search for food. I don't know how long it will take to return to the beach where we set off from and meet up with the main force. It is very likely that we will encounter even more powerful magical beasts on this journey. In the end, how long can our food last? Song Su lay in the tent and listened to the sounds coming from outside. He looked at the roof of the tent and knew very well that the food left could only last for 7 days at most. But at this moment, Song Su was more worried about the state of the team. Everyone had their own opinions. The morale of the team was already divided. Everyone had their own opinions. At this time, the leader needed to make the final decision. However, although Jinjin was in charge of this position, his prestige as a leader had not yet been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. The mutton incident seemed to be a good thing that could increase Zhang Jin's prestige as a leader, but it ended up causing the entire team to be poisoned, causing them to go through a lot of trouble and not be able to harvest enough food. Therefore, Zhang Jin could not consolidate his authority. Then, it all depends on this time, Song Su thought to himself. In all fairness, this was not a good opportunity. However, reality was always like this. It was cold and heartless, always placing unexpected and difficult problems directly in front of people. People were often caught off guard and could not be forced. Whether it was Zhang Jin, ZD, or Song Su himself, or the entire exploration team, they had all been forced into a corner by reality. Only by overcoming this difficult reality can you truly take charge of this team. Then, Jinjin, young leader, what will you choose? With this question in mind, Song Su slowly fell asleep. What should I choose? Jinjin was deep in thought. As a leader, he had no right to escape. He could only take responsibility. Now that the team is short of food, dealing with the pterosaur horde is one option to obtain food. But the risk is great, and the exploration team is not strong enough. If we were to be electrocuted by the leader of the pterosaur horde, we would definitely suffer heavy casualties. But I need a great victory. A great victory to my heart's content is the ideal result. If it's a Pyrrhic victory and there are too many casualties, the remaining people will definitely be disappointed and will no longer look forward to my leadership. At the same time, the scale of the entire exploration team is not that big. If there are too many casualties, how can the remaining people help me compete for the position of White Sand City Lord? Other than this choice, Zhang Jin knew that he had another choice. That is to give up on this pterosaur horde and continue exploring, hoping to find a better source of food in the future. This choice can temporarily stabilize the entire team, but the food reserves can only last for 7 days at most. It's hard to say what will happen next. It could be a weaker horde, or it could be a terrifying magical beast that will wipe out the entire exploration team. If the food is strictly controlled and reduced as much as possible, it can last for more than 10 days. But the risk of doing so is great. Once food is scarce, people will panic. They will even be wary of each other and hunt each other, eating each other in order to survive. My prestige is not enough to suppress such people's hearts. If this happens, the entire team will not collapse but riot. It's fine if it's me, but ZD will also be implicated. While Jinjin was deep in thought, a thought suddenly popped up in his mind. This thought was so bold and terrifying that even Jinjin himself was shocked. If I'm forced into a desperate situation, will I kill others and feed on human flesh in order to survive? No, how can that be? If I do that, how will I be any different from those beasts and animals? I'm a temple knight. Jinjin felt deeply ashamed. The temple knights represented light and bravery. On the battlefield, the temple knights would always charge at the front. In life, the temple knights upheld justice, upholding kindness, and protecting the weak. So it turns out that it's so difficult to become a leader. I'm afraid that I'm going crazy. Otherwise, why would I have such a terrifying thought? At this moment, Jinjin truly felt that it was not so easy to become a leader. A leader must shoulder their own responsibilities and not let down the trust of their subordinates. They must find the right path when they are confused and lead everyone out of the predicament. What's more, Jinjin's burden was far more than that. He thought of ZD. In his opinion, his fiancée had always trusted him, did her best to protect him, and never left him. He also thought of his family, his father who only had one arm left. He could not die. He had to become the Lord of White Sand City. This was the key step in the revival of the Hundred Needles family. There was also his pride as a noble, his glory as a temple knight. As he thought, Jinjin's brows furrowed tighter and tighter. His chest felt stuffy, and there was a feeling of suffocation. His tent was already the largest, but at this moment, the whole tent was like a monster's giant claw, constantly shrinking, as if it was strangling Jinjin's throat. Jinjin resisted the huge pressure. The voices outside the tent gradually faded. Most of the exploration team members got into the tent to sleep, but Jinjin felt that the pressure was getting heavier and heavier. After an unknown amount of time, Jinjin let out a soft cry. He suddenly bent over and sat down weakly on the military blanket, his back leaning against the only wooden pillar in the tent. Huff, huff, huff. Jinjin gasped for breath, his forehead full of sweat. He felt an intense tiredness. This tiredness was not physical, but mental exhaustion. What should I do? Jinjin was still confused and distressed. Subconsciously, he half knelt on the ground and began to pray again. Sacred Heavenly Emperor, my God, your vision is above the clouds. No matter what kind of fog you face, it will not stop you from moving forward. You hold the reins of the huge empire in your hands, leading hundreds of millions of people to victory. You are so wise, so decisive, you can see through the trajectory of fate. Now, your loyal and humble believer is praying to you. Please show me the way. Please clear the fog of fate for me. Please protect me, so that I can protect the pride of the nobles and the glory of the knights. However, God did not respond. Jinjin waited. He was looking forward to God's response. Time continued to pass without a sound. It was a long wait. Jinjin half knelt on the ground, lowered his head, and faced the direction of the Shengming Empire. It was a stubborn wait. This time, Needle Gold showed unprecedented patience in her prayer. However, in the end, the cold aura of the night kept coming in through the cracks of the tent. It also went into Jin's nose and seeped into his heart through his skin. Jin's heart seemed to gradually turn cold, and his eagerness fell to the bottom. Jinjin realized the cruel reality. God still did not give him a response. He would not wait for any instructions from the Shengming Emperor. The tent in the middle of the night was full of darkness, without a trace of light. The young Jinjin half knelt on the ground, like a stone statue. After a long time, the stone statue sighed. He no longer half knelt, but stood up with difficulty. His legs were sore and numb. Jinjin stamped his feet to relax his muscles. His eyes were dull, and his heart was heavy. He knew that he could only rely on himself. Without God's guidance, the road ahead was pitch black. But he had to keep going. Staying where he was would only be waiting for death, and it would also disappoint everyone. Life was like this. People were often forced to make all kinds of decisions by life when their futures were uncertain. Even people themselves knew how reckless this choice was. And people had to bear the consequences of their choices, whether it was bitter or sweet. Zhenjin could only continue to think. Strangely, this time, he did not feel the same embarrassment as before. It was as if he had broken through a limit. Perhaps it was because God did not respond, so he completely understood that there was no one he could rely on. When dawn came, more and more birds chirped in the forest. Zhenjin suddenly realized that an entire night had passed. He opened the tent's curtain and saw the morning sun. The sun shone through the clouds and shone on the half-dark forest. There was still white fog in the forest in the morning, and the air was damp and cold. Zhenjin breathed in, but he felt refreshed. The moment he opened the tent's curtain, he was a wise and powerful leader who could see through everything and make the most correct choice. Even if he knew that he was not, he had to act like it. There was no longer any hesitation on his face. He had already made his decision. Everyone was quickly gathered and listened to Zhen Jin's series of orders. Lan Zhao, in the next few days, you have to continue moving stealthily and find out more information about the flying squirrel community. Huang Zhao, Baya, Su, you're in charge of choosing the wood. We need to make a batch of short bows. ZD, I need you to concoct a medicine. It's best if it works on the leader of the flying squirrels as well. Yes, Zhenjin had decided to hunt down the flying squirrel community. Chapter 38. Zhenjin gave orders continuously. Whether it was Huang Zhou, Lan Zhao, Baya Su, or the others, they all obeyed the orders. However, Zhenjin looked around and still saw the flickering gazes of the exploration team members. Zhenjin shouted in a low voice, "Now, if anyone has different thoughts, raise them immediately. The Knights Templar will never punish anyone who dares to speak up." No one spoke. A few people opened their mouths to say something, but hesitated. Zhenjin's expression darkened slightly. He knew that he had not established enough prestige as a leader. Su spoke at the right time. "Sir, your decision is undoubtedly wise. Although the leader of the flying squirrels can produce electric shocks that can kill people, their numbers are very small. Sir's archery and dagger skills have always been perfect. In the past period of time, we have encountered many herds of beasts. Apart from a sheep, this group of flying squirrels is the weakest. If we give up, I'm afraid we won't be so lucky to encounter a more suitable target than the group of flying squirrels. My suggestion is that we can work hard to come up with tactics. The right tactics can make it easier for us to defeat these stupid flying squirrels. After all, a human's brain is much smarter than a beast's." "Very good." Zhenjin nodded with a look of approval. "Scholar Su, your opinion is very pertinent. In fact, we just need to get enough food. We can attract the flying squirrels in batches and control the scale of the battle. As long as we hunt enough food, we don't have to fight the leader of the flying squirrels head-on." Zhenjin's words were actually a little taken for granted. The nature of beasts was difficult to fathom, especially when everyone was very unfamiliar with these flying squirrels and had only been in contact with them for a short period of time. On this island, creatures like the flying squirrels had strong traces of humans and were not natural creatures. Therefore, it was really hard to say what their habits were. Whether it was Zhenjin or Su, they all knew this logic. However, after this deliberate conversation, everyone was no longer as shaken as before. Some people's gazes became resolute again, and their morale rose to a certain extent. Zhenjin's prestige had not been established, and Su's combat ability was very weak. However, combined with their influence, they could still mobilize the enthusiasm of the entire exploration team. Zhenjin was increasingly satisfied with Su. He thought to himself, Su knows how to cooperate with me. Perhaps this is where he is better than ZD. Although ZD is the president of the Chamber of Commerce, she is still too young. She has spent most of her energy and time on magic cultivation. Although Su has no power, he has served the nobles for half his life and has rich experience. All this time, He has been assisting me in controlling this exploration team. After breakfast, everyone quickly got to work. This place was a forest, and as far as the eye could see, there were trees everywhere. To make a short bow, he needed suitable wood. We now need two types of wood. One type of wood is used to make the bow arm of the short bow, and the other type of wood we will only choose the bark to make the bowstring. As for how to choose, I don't know. We still need to rely on Baya and Song Su. Huang Zhao looked at Song Su and Baya. The old scholar smiled. Although this island is full of strange mutated beasts, there are relatively few mutated trees and grass. I think these few types of trees are our targets. Baya said, Lord Huang Zhao, my father and I have also cut down trees and made hunting bows. I took a rough look, and this type of tree is closest to my memory. Combining Baya's experience, Song Su's knowledge, and Huang Zhao's personal experience of chopping trees, the three of them successfully decided on two types of trees. Then, Huang Zhao chopped down the trees. After all, he was a bronze-ranked warrior, and his strength was far beyond that of ordinary people. The blade from the blade spider was extremely sharp. With one slash, the tree slowly tilted and then fell to the ground. Baya walked forward and cut into the tree trunk with the blade. Then, he skillfully pried open a piece of bark. The bark was dark green and very hard on the outside, but when Baya turned the bark over, he saw the inner layer of the bark. The inner layer of the bark was yellowish green. Baya touched it and felt a smooth feeling on his fingers. He nodded slightly and commented, "This inner layer of bark should be able to make high-quality hemp rope." The three of them chose a big tree again. This tree was much thicker than the one they had cut down earlier. Huang Zhao pulled out the sharp blade that Jinjin had lent him and was about to start. Song Su stopped him. "Don't use such a sharp weapon. Use an axe. This kind of sharp weapon can only be used by extraordinary people. Ordinary people still use axes to chop wood." Huang Zhao followed the advice and chose an axe to chop the tree trunk. Iron swords were easy to bend when used to chop wood. People would not do this unless they had no other choice. The exploration team brought a few axes with them. Originally, it was mainly to facilitate the collection of food, such as bananas, coconuts, and so on. Secondly, it was to chop out a path. If they found a stable source of food, it would be very convenient to have a convenient path. Huang Zhao waved his thick arm and chopped more than 10 times before he managed to cut a hole in the tree trunk. "If I could use chi, I would only need one axe to chop down this damn tree," Huang Zhao muttered, not satisfied with his performance. Although bronze-level chi could not be attached to weapons, nor could it cover the surface of the body, after it was activated, it could temporarily increase a person's physical fitness. According to the different chi arts, cultivators would also focus on the improvement of strength, speed, endurance, recovery, and other aspects. After chopping a few more times, the hole in the tree trunk finally expanded to the point of a qualitative change. Huang Zhao changed direction and pushed the tree trunk hard, pushing down the big tree. Then, he waved his axe and chopped out a section of the tree trunk. Then, he took the tree core and cut it into wooden planks. After Baya and Song Su looked at the long wooden planks, they were very satisfied. Song Su let Huang Zhao deliberately bend this wooden plank. The plank showed that the toughness of the plank was very good. The three of them were happy. Things were progressing very smoothly. "Let's go back and report to Lord Jinjin. It's time to bring people to chop down these trees." Song Su made a decision. The three of them were located near the camp. This place had already been cleared, so it was relatively safe. Soon, the three of them returned to the camp. Jinjin was in charge of the camp, overseeing the overall situation. After knowing the results of the three of them, Jinjin thought for a moment and asked Song Su, "How many people do you think are suitable, and how long will it take for us to get enough wood?" Song Su had obviously thought about it on the way back. He immediately replied, "Of course, the more the better, but sir, we have a few things to pay attention to. The first is the safety of the logging team. Generally, when logging in the more dangerous wilderness, patrols and guards will be assigned. Although the exploration team members are all warriors, their physical strength is limited. Logging is a very heavy physical work, and it will make people exhausted. As a result, their combat strength will also decrease a lot. If there is really a dangerous situation, it will be difficult for the logging team members to resist. The second is food. I suggest that we send some people out to gather as much food as possible around. The harvest will definitely not be much, but our food reserves have reached the warning line. Even if there is only a little more food, it will be good. Third, this one can be used more. Not only can we make short bows, but we can also set up more defensive fortifications. On the way back, I communicated with Baya, and he knows many hunters' traps. We can set up more traps and make them bigger. It's impractical to deal with people, but those flying squirrels are wild beasts. We have a huge advantage in intelligence. Fourth, I think this is also the most crucial and difficult to solve. Our time is actually very tight, but whether it's the hemp rope for the bowstring or the bow arm of the short bow, they all need to be dried. It will take at least a day to make the bowstring and the short bow. It will take at least 2 days to dry. There will be very little time left for us to train. Just like before, Sang-Soo provided a lot of pertinent advice to Jinjin. Jinjin nodded. Sang-Soo was still as reliable as ever. Jinjin had always thought that Sang-Soo was the best candidate for the steward. It was not that simple to mobilize personnel. In this regard, ZD did not have enough experience. Huang Zhao and Lan Zhao were good at fighting. According to Jinjin's understanding, this team of brothers did not have much achievements in command. All they could do was lead the charge. Jinjin smiled at Sang-Soo's distress and calmly took out the potion. The next moment, Jinjin saw Sang-Soo's eyes light up. Jinjin said, "I have already prepared for this. There are 2 potions here. One can be applied to the bow arm, and the other can dry the bark that has just been torn off quickly. It will be done in 1 night. But be careful. This potion will only last for 1 day." These potions were all made by ZD on the spot. Jinjin and ZD had discussed the crossbows before, and these potions were the main results. Sang-Soo was overjoyed. With these, that's great. The lack of food made time very critical. The potions seemed insignificant, but in fact, they solved the biggest problem facing the exploration team. Jinjin then appointed Sang-Soo to be in charge of leading the team to cut down the trees. He also ordered Baya to collect food, accompanied by Huang Zhao, to be responsible for the safety of Baya and the others. On the other hand, they had to continue to clean up the surroundings of the camp. Huang Zhao was at the bronze level. Even if he couldn't use battle energy, his combat power was higher than ordinary warriors. But this way, everyone will be assigned to the logging team and the search team. There will be no one to guard the logging team, Sang-Soo said worriedly. The exploration team was originally quite large, but when Jinjin took over, there were only a dozen people left. After that, they were poisoned and their combat power and stamina dropped. A mission that used to require 1 person might now require 1.5, or even 2. Therefore, manpower was very tight. "Don't worry, I will personally be the guard of the logging team," Jinjin said. Sang-Soo was immediately relieved. Jinjin's vicinity must be the safest place. He had thought that Jinjin would be guarding ZD. Although her strategic significance on this island had decreased a lot, ZD was a mage after all. Sang-Soo pondered and said, "In this way, sir, are you going to let Lan Zhao guard the camp?" Jinjin shook his head. "No, it's very important to investigate the enemy. Lan Zhao still has to investigate the details of the flying squirrel community. He could do it alone. The others are not strong enough. They will only be a burden if they go." Sang-Soo frowned and reminded, "Then Lady ZD's safety," Jinjin smiled. "I've talked to her. She will stay in the camp alone. She is also a pharmacist and has ways to protect herself. If she encounters any danger that is difficult to deal with, our logging team is near the camp, and I can immediately reinforce her." Sang-Soo had no more objections. He knew that the exploration team was short of manpower. Jinjin's arrangement was already the best. Chapter 39. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of the axes hacking on the tree trunk rose and fell one after another. The axes were waved with great force and embedded deeply into the tree trunk. After a burst of small pieces of wood, the members of the exploration team shook the axes and pulled them out with great force. The tree trunk had been cut into a large enough gap, and the entire tree began to shake. The members of the logging team shouted loudly and gave a reminder. Then, a few of them exerted their strength and stepped on the tree trunk. The tree trunk creaked and then fell to the ground with a loud crash. Accompanied by the sound of countless branches being broken, the leaves also flew in all directions. Although the exploration team only brought a few axes, it greatly increased their efficiency and saved the members' physical energy consumption. Next, it was to saw the tree trunk into sections for easier transportation. These tree trunks had to be rolled to the camp for fine processing in the camp. The exploration team did not bring a saw. However, Zhenjin lent it to them. Zhenjin's saw came from the blade spider. The spider's hind legs were long and straight, and there was a row of dense spikes. This was a natural saw. The blade spider was a silver-level magical beast. The exploration team quickly experienced the power of a silver-level magical beast from another perspective. They worked together and used the blade spider's legs to saw through the thick tree trunks. It was as if they were using a sharp knife to easily cut white bread. The old scholar Tsang Su had rich experience in leading and commanding. Because Zhenjin was in charge, he divided the people in his hands into two groups. One group was logging, and the other group was peeling the bark, tearing the inner side of the bark into thin threads. Every once in a while, the two groups would take turns to change the work content. This way, the team members could conserve their energy, rest, and maintain the progress of their work. In just one morning, the logging team had completed their mission beyond expectations. A large amount of wood, rolled in sections, was transported to the camp one after another and temporarily piled up in a corner. There were also the thin threads torn from the bark that had been smeared with potions. The lunch supply was increased, and almost everyone was extremely hungry. Baya and Huang Zhao also returned at mealtime. They did not gain much, only a few birds and a pheasant. These gains were obviously incomparable to the manpower and time they had invested, but at least they had cleared the forest near the camp once again. To everyone's surprise, Zhenjin also ordered that there would be a short nap after lunch. This had never happened before. This was actually a suggestion made by Tsang Su. The afternoon break could ensure the team members' efficiency in the afternoon. Although the logging work was over, there was still a lot of work to be done. A large number of tree trunks were chopped down to form wooden planks. This was the prototype of a short bough. Therefore, there were requirements for the length and thickness of the wooden planks. Even if the wooden board was placed in the original position of the tree trunk, it would be best if it was the core of the tree. This is the work of joinery. It would be great if there was a carpenter around, but the members of the exploration team were all amateurs, so they immediately showed their amateurish nature. Many tree trunks were destroyed, and although many planks were chopped out, they were all unqualified after Baya's inspection. The unqualified planks could be used to set up traps for hunters. No matter how tattered the wood was, it could still be used to make a fire. After the fire, the charcoal and wood ash formed were also good resources with high practical value. Now that the exploration team had reached this stage, they needed all kinds of resources. They would never let go of the resources that they could get their hands on easily. The progress of the carpentry was quite slow, which made Zhenjin more and more worried and impatient. Although he also knew that he could not be anxious. To be honest, Zidi's potion had indeed helped him a lot. It had saved him the most critical time. Moreover, Tsang Su's arrangements were also very reasonable and sufficient. The old scholar had already estimated the situation of failure. After the members of the exploration team gradually became familiar with this work, the loss of wood began to greatly decrease. One after another, qualified wooden planks were born, and there were more and more of them. When the number of wooden planks increased to a certain extent, Tsang Su instructed everyone to start using the wooden planks to make short bows. This process was actually quite simple. They only needed to cut the wooden planks into thinner strips, forming a shape that was slightly thicker in the middle and slightly thinner at both ends. They also needed to cut notches at both ends to facilitate the hanging of the bowstring in the future. After Baya checked and confirmed that the short bows were made, they would be smeared with potion and placed in a dark corner to dry. After this work was done, many people started to clamor. They felt that they could become bow craftsmen. More people kept moving their fingers or kneading their arms, thighs, and other muscles. The pain and soreness made them grimace. Their bodies were already close to their limits, but there was still other work waiting for them. They needed to make a large number of arrows. There was usually a standard for the selection of arrow shafts. For the wood that met the standard, it would be cut into long cylinders, and then the surface would be smoothed. On the exploration team's side, of course, there was no mature processing process. The main material they used to make arrows was tree branches. The tree branches were as straight as possible, close to the length and thickness of a normal arrow. Baya instructed everyone to make arrows. First, they peeled off the skin of the tree branches to make the arrow shafts. Then, they carefully cut the feathers with a blade and stuck them with potion to make the arrow feathers. Finally, they roasted the arrowheads slightly to harden the wood after it was carbonized, and then sharpened them until they were fine. The arrows made in this way were far from being comparable to the regular military supplies. First of all, the material chosen for the arrow shafts was a notch worse. The material chosen for the arrow feathers was not of high quality and was completely shoddy. But don't despise it. There were too few feathers in the exploration team. Most of them came from the chicken feathers and bird feathers that Baya hunted today, so every single one had to be cherished. The only gratifying thing was that the potion that ZD had concocted on the spot was really sticky. As for the arrowheads, they were simply too shabby. There wasn't even an iron arrowhead. If they were really used, they would be scrapped after a few uses. The lethality was naturally very low, but it was still a threat to ordinary beasts. Apart from the making of the arrows, there were other jobs. For example, a large wooden shield, which was as tall as a person and relatively wide. It was assembled from tree trunks and vines and stood on the ground to form an extremely simple and short curtain wall. This was also called a shield. A long time ago, when the humans attacked the castle, there were such defensive fortifications. By now, this kind of fortification had long been eliminated. Even if someone used it, they would at least put a layer of iron on the surface. Other than the shield, there was also a wooden spear. The members of the exploration team could hold a spear in both hands and assassinate the flying squirrels at a safe distance. However, this tactic was only slightly better than nothing, because everyone knew that the squirrels were very fast and could glide in midair. Their tails could adjust their direction in the air, and their bodies were very agile. What everyone was looking forward to was mainly the short bow. By evening, the torn bark had completely dried up. While admiring ZD's methods, the people began to knit the hemp rope. The method of knit the rope was also learned from Baya. There was a small trick involved. The main thing was to first divide a thin thread into two bundles. Each bundle rotated counterclockwise, but when the two bundles were combined, they rotated clockwise. This way, the woven rope would be tighter and would not spread out easily. The hemp rope was used as a bowstring. Each short bow was equipped with at least two bowstrings, one for regular use and one for spare. By the time they had dinner at night, the bowstrings had basically been made. Just like noon, dinner was also very sumptuous. There was also game, which became a rare flavor for everyone. The next morning, Junjin and the others all woke up early because they had an important thing to do: test the bow. After a night and ZD's medicine, the bow had already dried. Baya tried to grab the two ends of the bow with both hands and bend it forcefully. After seeing that the bow arm had bent into a big arc, he grinned and said, "Very good. It's even better than I imagined." Sangsu pondered and said, "Huang Zhao, I'll give you a mission. Break this bow arm, but you must use force slowly." Huang Zhao understood what Sangsu meant and immediately set to work. When the bow arm was bent to its limit, it immediately broke into two with a crack. Everyone saw it with their own eyes and immediately understood the limit of this simple bow arm. Song Su estimated and said, "It seems that we can only use a hemp rope as the bowstring." No one had any objections. Sometimes, there would be many hemp ropes combined to form a bowstring. But after experimenting, it was more appropriate to use a hemp rope for this kind of short bow arm's toughness and limit. Baya tied the bowstring. He was making a live knot, ingenious and reliable. Immediately, the hunter's son nocked an arrow, aimed at a distant target, and shot the arrow. Everyone opened their eyes wide. Obviously, the arrow that was originally heading straight ahead flew to the top left and then fell to the ground. The shooting range was more than 50 steps. It was very far from the target, who knew where it had gone. But no one showed any disappointment. Zheng Jin even nodded slightly. He knew that this was just the beginning. The bow needed to be adjusted. The bow arm that was made was very rough and needed to continuously use tools such as daggers to continue working on the bow arm. At the same time, the bowstring and arrow had to be adjusted. Along with this process, the accuracy of the short bow would become stable and the shooting range would be greatly improved. Finally, after Baya's adjustment, the arrow successfully hit the target 100 steps away and the arrowhead pierced 2 fingers deep. Zheng Jin was already very satisfied with this result. On one hand, this was not a composite bow, but a single bow. The bow arm and bowstring were all made of local materials and were not carefully selected. On the other hand, the arrow did not have an iron arrowhead. It was only sharpened after carbonization and handled very roughly. To be able to perform like this was already very good, because Zheng Jin did not ask for much. They were now in the forest, not the vast and empty terrain of the grassland, so the longbow was not suitable. The members of the exploration team were not outstanding archers. Most of them were forced to do something beyond their abilities. Don't expect them to have any accuracy beyond 100 steps. Due to the limitations of the environment and personnel, the effective range of the short bow can only be 100 steps. The key is how many arrows can we shoot within this 100 steps. If we can shoot more than 3 arrows with a certain accuracy, then the short bow plan will be considered a success. Chapter 40. Even though it was only 3 arrows, it had a huge impact on the outcome of the battle. That was because one side was unharmed and was shooting from afar, while the other side was losing members. 1-on-1 and 2-on-1 on the battlefield were 2 completely different things. The so-called art of war had a common point: the use of various methods to create a situation where one side outnumbered the other, thus creating an advantage in terms of military strength. Moreover, the flying squirrels weren't undead. As long as they were natural creatures, they would have morale. For example, Zheng Jin had directly killed the leader of the flying squirrels, causing the rest of them to collapse and flee in all directions. In fact, they couldn't shoot too many arrows. If they shot too many arrows, their physical strength would be greatly depleted. They were only temporary archers, so their physical strength should be allocated more to close combat. Otherwise, the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. Next, Zheng Jin left the work of adjusting the bows to Baya. Huang Zhao and Lan Zhao only had a small part of leadership skills. At most, they could lead small teams to charge on the deck of the ship. As for Zheng Jin, he didn't know how to adjust the bow himself. Song Su and ZD were even worse. Baya, the son of a hunter, had ordinary strength. If he hadn't fallen to this island, he would have been too mediocre. However, under such circumstances, he was able to rely on his own talent to shine brightly. For him, this island was extremely dangerous, but at the same time, it also held great opportunities. In the end, I still have too few subordinates. Those who are slightly talented, like Baya, can stand out. Zheng Jin sighed inwardly. Baya led a few people to adjust the bows. Of course, the rest of the people wouldn't be idle. Huang Zhao continued to hunt. His main goal wasn't to obtain food, but to target the wild birds and harvest their feathers. Lan Zhao continued to scout the surroundings of the flying squirrels. Wooden shields and hunter traps were made by people one after another. There were also hemp ropes woven from tree bark. The short ones were used for bowstrings, while the long ones were used for binding. For example, the production of shields. The storage of hemp ropes continued to increase. These things were unremarkable, but they were very practical. No one could estimate how long they would stay on this island, so they had to stock up on hemp rope as much as possible. According to Song Su's introduction, hemp rope had a wide range of applications. Other than its own function, hemp ropes could also be combined to weave a net. The net could be used to store things, and it could be used to form cloth and silk to cover the body. It could also be woven into straw shoes. Song Su was also involved. He provided an extremely crude loom. This type of loom was made with more than a dozen small wooden stakes inserted into the soil. The stakes were arranged in 2 rows. One of the rows of small wooden stakes was separated by a horizontal wooden stick to hold them in place. After the small wooden stakes were wound on the line, dozens of vertical lines were formed. Every time the wooden stick was lifted, half of the small wooden stake would be lifted, and then half of the vertical line would be lifted. At this time, the only horizontal line was inserted in the tilted angle. Once the vertical thread was put down, 1 horizontal thread and a dozen vertical threads were compacted together, completing the basic movement of weaving. This action was repeated dozens or hundreds of times, and a piece of cloth was successfully born. This kind of loom was extremely primitive, and its efficiency was completely incomparable to the looms in the empire. One was on the ground, while the other was in the sky. A person could only get a small piece the size of but after spending half a day working. However, it did save a lot of manpower and material resources, and its efficiency was much higher than that of pure manual labor. The members of the exploration team who used these looms to work were all amazed by Song Su's profound knowledge. However, Song Su told them that this kind of loom was obtained when he was studying the information of the orcs. Compared to the human empire, although the orcs occupied the wilderness continent, they generally existed in the form of tribes. Their living standards and productivity were generally low. This kind of loom was common among the orcs. As for ZD, she was mainly responsible for making poison. Zhen Jin told her clearly that he needed a poison that could dissipate naturally, or could disappear by boiling, roasting, or other methods. Or rather, even if this poison existed, it would only be effective on flying squirrels and would not cause much harm to the human body. After all, Zhen Jin needed food to hunt flying squirrels. If the poison was too strong, even if the flying squirrels were killed, the meat of the flying squirrels could not be eaten. For the entire exploration team, the losses would be far greater than the gains. The environment at the moment was extremely simple and crude, and ZD could only try. She made another request. She needed live flying squirrels for experiments. Zhen Jin secretly set off and spied on the flying squirrels with Lan Zhao. Song Su stayed in the camp to command the deployment. After adjusting the bow, Bai led the team to start shooting again. In the evening, the leaders met again to exchange their findings. Zhen Jin and Lan Zhao caught 3 live flying squirrels and handed them to ZD. Xian Zhao did not have any prey. Hunting did not rely on combat strength, and he also lost some iron arrowheads. These iron arrowheads were very precious, and they would be gone once they were used. However, it was not that they did not gain anything. Xian Zhao and his team failed to hunt, so they could only go further and try their luck. In the end, they accidentally found a small bamboo forest. Bamboo was a very excellent resource. Bamboo with bamboo joints was a natural water container. Bamboo could be made into bamboo rafts, and bamboo could be sharpened into traps. The third day, shoot! Huang Zhao gave the order, and many arrows flew out with a so-so sound. More than a dozen simple and crude targets were set up 120 steps away. Concentric circles were drawn on the targets with charcoal, but the arrows rarely hit the targets, let alone a few circles. The circles on the targets were a little small, about the size of the flying squirrels. However, in a real battle, everyone had to shoot flying squirrels, and these flying squirrels could move. Therefore, The results of this kind of shooting were unacceptable. Your posture is not right. Straighten your back and straighten your arms. Steady, steady. Why are you shaking? Xianzhao was the instructor. He frowned, and there was a huge pressure in his heart. In comparison, Zhenjin was the best archer in the team. The second best was Baiya. This young man's archery was even better than Xianzhao and the others. After all, for him, archery was a skill that he relied on to make a living. Hunters did not fight head-on when hunting. This was just a way for them to make a living. Besides hunting dogs, hunters used traps the most. They also used bows a lot. Excellent hunters would choose to retreat or stop when they encountered large beasts that they could not hunt. Xianzhao and Lanzhao were good at close combat. When shooting from a distance, they used crossbows more than bows. They were surviving on the ship, so they specially practiced archery. Xianzhao's hunting results yesterday were a mess. Today, he was arranged by Zhenjin to be the temporary instructor. In order to save his face, Xianzhao worked very hard. When it came to training others, Xianzhao was more reliable. Although his archery was a little worse than Baiya's. Baiya's archery relied more on his intuition and was purely unorthodox. At least Xianzhao had been trained before and knew what the key to archery was. First, we have to practice individual assault. Then, we have to form a curtain of arrows to shoot. With our current archery skills, we can't even form the most basic curtain of arrows. Zhenjin inspected the training and saw this situation. He was quite anxious, but he did not show it on the surface. Today, Baiya replaced Xianzhao and was in charge of hunting. The main target was still wild birds. The exploration team needed more feathers to make arrow tails. No one expected him to hunt enough food. Individual hunting was very risky, and the efficiency was actually very low. Most of them depended on the weather and luck. In the entire empire, the life of hunters was actually very difficult. Therefore, as the saying went, those who hunt are not as good as those who herd, and those who herd are not as good as those who farm. Under normal circumstances, hunters did not have enough to eat. Compared to hunters and herdsmen, farmers lived the most stable lives, and the quality of life was the most guaranteed. Hunters seemed to have a source of meat, but in fact, most of the mountains and forests were the territory of nobles. Hunters who poached without permission would be severely punished once they were caught. In the situation of the exploration team, they could only rely on large-scale hunting to satisfy their own food consumption. The day's training lasted from morning to night. After eating, the members of the exploration team were not in the mood to talk and laugh. They all fell asleep in their tents. In Zhenjin's tent, Song Su reported the grim situation with a solemn expression. Lord Zhenjin, we don't have much food left. It can be said that our consumption is very high. At this rate, we won't be able to last for more than a few days. Zhenjin's expression was calm, and his mood was calm. Regarding this, he himself was very puzzled. In these 2 days, his originally anxious mood gradually calmed down just like that. He adapted to this kind of pressure and instead comforted Song Su. We have to train our archery skills. This matter can't be rushed. We can only grit our teeth and persevere. Without basic archery skills, it's useless to rashly start a war. This kind of hard training will indeed consume physical strength and increase the consumption of food. However, by consuming food to improve their archery skills, they will be able to reduce the number of casualties in future battles. This is very cost-effective. I understand, sir. Song Su nodded. It's just that this way, our food consumption will be intense. Everyone knows this, and the team members are very worried. Zhenjin smiled. Then tell them exactly how much food we have left. If necessary, let each of them see our food reserves with their own eyes. Song Su's expression changed slightly, and he said in a deep voice, I understand, sir. The 4th day, at the shooting range, although their arms were sore and even swollen, the members of the exploration team were all serious. They gritted their teeth and trained hard. They were all clear about the food reserves in the team and had a very clear understanding of their situation. Right now, they had to stake everything on one throw. If the hunt failed, what awaited them was death. Under this kind of pressure, everyone worked hard and did their best to practice their archery skills. Although the results of the early training were unsightly, after everyone got used to it, the situation of the arrows hitting the target improved greatly. It was very rare for arrows to hit the bullseye, but most of the arrows could hit the target. Seeing that the results of archery had stabilized, Huang Zhao immediately moved away the fixed target and replaced it with a moving target. These moving targets were short wooden stakes. The wooden stakes were tied with hemp ropes, and the other end of the ropes was hung on a high branch. After pulling the wooden stakes high, they let go, and the wooden stakes swayed under the tree. Huang Zhao asked the team members to shoot the arrows on the wooden stakes. The results immediately slipped and became even worse than before. No one complained. Everyone knew that in actual combat, the flying squirrel's movements were faster and more variable than the wooden stakes. Practice continuously. He cherished every breath he took. During lunch, the team members were silent, and the atmosphere was very solemn. Many people subconsciously frowned, constantly thinking and reflecting on what they could do to improve their archery skills. When they were resting in the tent, they also tried to draw their bows, even if they did not have a bow in their hands. After training, the team members rubbed each other's arms. Many people could not raise their arms. The swelling of their arms spread to everyone. Fortunately, there was the medicine provided by ZD. These medicines were made at the last minute. Originally, they were suitable for superhumans, but after diluting them, they were used on ordinary team members, and they still had a strong recovery effect. These medicines were used externally and when taken orally. After a night's rest, their arms would basically recover. During dinner, everyone was greeted by a plain soup. The scattered wild vegetables seemed to be seasoning. The team members' expressions changed, but they did not say anything. Everyone could understand the severity of the situation. Sang-Soo, come out for a moment. Zhenjin's voice came from afar. Why is there only this for dinner? Zhenjin seemed to be questioning Sang-Soo. Sir, there is not enough food. This is the only thing we can do. Sang-Soo answered Zhenjin. Zhenjin retorted, but I remember that there is still some food in reserve. It shouldn't be to this extent. Sir, these are the only dry rations left. They are for you and Lady ZD. Take them all out. Sir, take them all out. If you don't eat, how will you have the strength to train and fight? This conversation made everyone's emotions fluctuate. Many of them were moved. Sir, please let us attack. That night, a team member took the initiative to find Zhenjin and asked to attack. However, Zhenjin rejected this request. Training. You guys still need more training. The fifth day, training, and more training. In the evening, Zhenjin checked the results and was gratified to find that 5 out of 10 arrows hit the target. The moving target was relatively large, much larger than a real flying squirrel. However, this result had already reached Zhenjin's standard. He had never expected to train every team member into a godly archer. It was impossible in a short time. Everyone's aptitude actually determined the upper limit of their shooting skills. However, the arrow curtain could make up for the lack of accuracy. This kind of shooting skill could form a qualified arrow curtain. In the afternoon, Sang-Soo also came to persuade Zhenjin. Sir, we can attack now. Wait a little longer. Zhenjin became more determined. This kind of willpower surprised even himself. Chapter 41. The sixth day. After breakfast, Zhenjin faced the crowd and said, We just finished our remaining rations. Everyone was silent as they stood ramrod straight. They were all mentally prepared for this outcome. Zhenjin stood in front of the crowd, his eyes sharp as he scanned the crowd. Now, who still doesn't understand our situation? Take a step forward. No one moved. They stood still. Everyone's face was grim, and their chests seemed to be boiling hot magma. It was a battle intent that had been accumulated for a long time, a strong desire to live. Very good. Everyone is smart. We all understand what will happen if we lose. These days, Lan Zhao has carried out a comprehensive investigation. Other than the pterosaurs, there are no other suitable targets. Today, if we defeat them, they will be our food. If we lose, we will be their food. I, Jin, as a holy knight and the only heir of the Hundred Needles clan, will be with you. I will lead you through difficulties and obstacles to reap victory. Follow me, and let us obtain glory." The morale was high, and the will was strong. The team set off. Soon, they arrived at the designated battlefield. This battlefield was carefully arranged. The most conspicuous thing was the short obstacles made of vines and bamboo. These obstacles were connected to each other, forming a long line of defense. If the pterosaurs wanted to cross the line of defense, they had to fly. This gave the team a good opportunity to shoot. There were a total of 3 lines of defense. Under normal circumstances, rivers were natural obstacles that didn't require manpower to set up, which was the best. However, there were no rivers nearby. Secondly, the rivers on this island were more dangerous, and there were often wild pythons and green vines. Jin wasn't the only one who had encountered this kind of gold-level magic plant. Sangsu's exploration team had also encountered it a few times and paid the price with blood. Under Jin's command, Lan Zhao moved forward alone. His back quickly disappeared from everyone's sight. Most people formed a battle formation. The battle formation was very simple. It was a horizontal row. Such a formation was convenient for long-range firepower. Sangsu and ZD stood behind the row, beside Jin. Jin began to pray silently. "Shengming Emperor, my God, you are wise and mighty, always able to grasp the opportunity to win on the battlefield. You are the God of knights, the God of war, and the God of victory. Please bless me with victory, and I will add a glimmer of brilliance to your throne with faith and glory, and with the blood of my mortal enemy. Oh God, please listen to my call." The god did not respond. Jin sighed inwardly. Usually, when facing a battle, the temple knights would pray. The Shengming Emperor would also respond by bestowing divine spells upon the holy knights. However, ever since Jin woke up, he had prayed many times, but the Shengming Emperor did not respond. It was because of this that Jin did not pray in front of everyone. Because if there was no divine spell, it would leave a bad impression on others. They would think that Jin, a temple knight, was not favored and protected by the god. In this way, before the battle even began, the morale of his side would be shaken. The result was not out of Jin's expectations. He was also glad that he had made a wise choice. The early morning sun shone through the rosy clouds. The forest was gradually bathed in the sunlight, and the dark green gradually became brighter. The air was still icy cold. When everyone breathed, they could exhale white mist that was visible to the naked eye. As time passed, the chirping of birds became more and more frequent. Suddenly, a flock of birds flapped their wings in front of them, leaving the canopy and flying into the air. Lan Zhao's figure once again appeared in front of everyone. He was running with all his might, and behind him was a large group of flying squirrels, squeaking. Among them, there were many that emitted the aura of bronze-level magical beasts. There was a slight commotion in the front line, and then it immediately returned to silence. Jin's eyes flashed with a flash of light, and his spirit was slightly lifted. Lan Zhao's provocation this time was very successful. The next moment, Jin shouted, "Get ready." The exploration team members were already prepared. Upon hearing this, they immediately drew their arrows and knocked them on their bowstrings. Their movements were in sync. They drew their bows one after another, but did not shoot. "Shoot!" Jin shouted again. The team members immediately let go of their bows. In an instant, the bowstrings vibrated and all the arrows flew out. Lan Zhao's footsteps did not stop. When he saw the arrows flying towards him, he immediately fell to the ground and rolled with the momentum. A flying squirrel leader missed and hit the ground. The grass and small pieces of soil splattered everywhere, immediately creating a small mud pit. Lan Zhao quickly got up from the inertia of the roll. This time, he had already raised his shield. This shield had been prepared for a long time, and many sides were placed on the ground. None of the arrows hit Lan Zhao's shield. The arrow curtain gathered into one layer, screening out many of the flying squirrels. A flying squirrel leader pounced on Lon Zao's back. Lon Zao heard the movement and suddenly turned around, raised his shield, and swept the flying squirrel away with a bang. "Get ready, shoot!" Zhenjin shouted again when he saw the flying squirrel crossing the vine barrier. More than a dozen arrows once again formed a thin layer of arrow curtain. Among them were a few short iron arrows shot out by the crossbows. The arrow curtain drew a gentle arc in the air and accurately landed in the swarm of flying squirrels. A few wooden arrows hit Lon Zao's shield and the leather armor on his body, but did not cause any damage to the latter. The crossbows were in the hands of people with good shooting skills, so they would not hit Lon Zao. The remaining arrowheads were all made of wood. There were no iron arrowheads, but the tip of the wooden arrow shaft had been burned black, carbonized, and sharpened. Of course, these arrowheads could not cause much damage to Lon Zao, and they were not much of a threat to the flying squirrel leader. However, they could still kill ordinary flying squirrels. After this layer of arrow curtain fell, many more flying squirrels fell to the ground. Some died on the spot, while others were injured and screaming. After 2 shots, more than a dozen flying squirrels had lost their ability to fight and died in the midst of their charge. The swarm of flying squirrels began to scatter. Most of them were still chasing after Lon Zao, while a small number of them directly attacked the formation. "Get ready," Zhenjin said again. "Shoot!" After the 3rd volley, everyone's movements began to be uneven. Although the arrow curtain formed in the air, it was clearly not as dense as before. However, because both sides were close to each other, the arrows still caused a lot of damage to the flying squirrels. Baya and Huang Zao aimed their crossbows at the flying squirrel leader at the same time. Although the flying squirrel leader was hit by an arrow, it was only slowed down. It was not injured. Instead, its ferocity was aroused, and its speed increased. There were 2 flying squirrels in total. One of them had set its sights on Lon Zao, while the other pounced on the formation. "Fight freely." After Zhenjin gave the order, he immediately pulled out his dagger and threw it with both hands. The 2 flying squirrel leaders were stabbed by the dagger at almost the same time. After they fell to the ground, they rolled a few times due to inertia and then stopped moving. Bright red blood quickly flowed out from the fatal wound in their eye sockets and spread to the surrounding grass. At this distance, they were already within the range of Zhenjin's flying dagger attack. Zhenjin's physical fitness was astonishing. The strength of his throwing arm was much stronger than that of a crossbow. Without their leader, the flying squirrels immediately fell into a panic. The team members shot freely. Only a few flying squirrels managed to reach the team members, but they were then stabbed to death by a few wooden spears. After struggling for a while, the few remaining flying squirrels scattered in all directions. "Phew, we won. Those 2 flying squirrel leaders have died at the hands of Lord Zhenjin. Lord is mighty." Lon Zao returned to the formation with his shield. There were wooden arrows stuck in the shield and his shoulder armor. Zhenjin only needed to sweep his gaze to know that Lon Zao was not injured at all. He patted Lon Zao's shoulder and said, "You did well. Everything was under Lord Zhenjin's command." Lon Zao bowed and said respectfully, Everyone knew that the key to victory in this battle was still Zhenjin. His flying dagger technique was amazing. At the same time, he had taken care of the 2 most threatening flying squirrel leaders and completely destroyed the morale of the flying squirrels. "Let's rest for a while. We will continue hunting," Zhenjin ordered. "Yes, Lord Zhenjin," the team members answered loudly. Their morale was higher than before the start of the battle. The way everyone looked at Zhenjin was also different from before. Before this, everyone still had doubts and worries in their hearts. After all, everyone knew that Zhenjin was staking everything on a single throw to hunt the flying squirrels. No one knew what the outcome would be. Even if Zhenjin was a noble and a holy knight, there was no guarantee that the hunt would be a success. If it failed, the entire expedition team would collapse and be destroyed. As the leader, Jin Jun would bear the first responsibility that could not be shirked. But now that the first official hunt was a complete victory, the worries in everyone's hearts were swept away. Before this, they still had doubts about Zhun Jin's decision, but now they felt that it was wise and decisive. The Lord Jinjin is a holy knight, after all. Bai Ye's eyes flashed. Yes, to be able to be under the command of the Lord Jinjin is truly my fortune, Huang Zhao sighed. Following the Lord Jinjin, we will definitely be able to set sail again. Everyone whispered to each other, looking at Jinjin with reverence. This small victory allowed them to truly acknowledge Zhun Jin's leadership. This was because Zhun Jin had fulfilled his promise. He could really lead them to victory and obtain glory. It was not just empty talk. My lord, I knew that all of this wouldn't be a problem for you. ZD, who was beside him, also revealed a smile. Her purple crystal eyes revealed traces of adoration. Song Su exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and said to himself, with this, the entire exploration team will be safe. Their previous situation was like being on the edge of a cliff with one foot hanging in the air. Now that they had achieved a complete victory, although they did not replenish much food, the results had swept away everyone's worries. The entire team became closer, tightly surrounding Jinjin, the only core. However, just as the morale was high and they were celebrating, a strange sound suddenly came from the forest in the distance. The sound of squeaking could be heard without end. The flying squirrels that had fled had actually attracted a large group of people. Ah, so many flying squirrels. They're charging over. How did they alarm so many flying squirrels? We're only at the periphery. For a moment, the expedition team was in a panic. Ha ha ha! Jinjin laughed loudly. Chapter 42. The panicked members of the exploration team were attracted by Zhun Jin's laughter. Jinjin immediately shouted, I'm here. Why are you panicking? No matter how many flying squirrels there are, they will only be our food. Listen to my orders. Reorganize the formation and kill all these flying squirrels. Yes, sir. Everyone answered loudly. The front line quickly recovered. Jinjin looked into the distance, and his pupils could not help but shrink. His physical fitness was higher than ordinary people, so he could see more clearly than ordinary people. At this moment, with a hurried glance, he saw 7 flying squirrel leaders and hundreds of ordinary flying squirrels swarming out. I'm afraid all the flying squirrels are moving in full force. As expected, it's hard to predict the nature of a beast. Jinjin had no intention of retreating at all. This situation was within his expectations. Before the hunt, Zhun Jin and the others had predicted many situations. The worst-case scenario was that Lan Zhao had alarmed the entire colony when he first attracted the flying squirrels. Now that Jinjin had obtained a small victory, he had increased his prestige, consolidated his position, and raised the morale of the entire team. It could be said that after the previous small victory, the entire team was completely different from before. This was already not bad. Get ready, shoot, Zhun Jin shouted. When everyone heard the order, their faces were cold, and they all knocked their arrows and drew their bows. A thin layer of arrow curtain covered the flying squirrels, and they immediately fell to the ground. There were many flying squirrels attacking, and they were very densely packed. Therefore, the result of this round of volley was the highest in history. However, the flying squirrel group was relatively large, and none of the flying squirrel leaders died. Instead, the flying squirrels were more ferocious. They burst into squeaking sounds, and the speed of their attack seemed to have increased. Many people's faces were a little pale. After this round of volley, they understood the situation. There were many flying squirrels. Even if they shot 7 or 8 times, they might not be able to kill all of them. Moreover, at this distance and the speed of the flying squirrel's attack, not to mention 7 or 8 volleys, even 5 or 6 volleys would not be enough time. Soon, the second volley was shot. The third volley was shot. Fight freely, Zhun Jin ordered after that. The arrow curtain made up for the lack of accuracy to a large extent. But now that the distance was extremely close, the accuracy of the archers would be greatly increased, and firing in unison would instead limit their performance. This was especially true for outstanding shooters. Whoosh! The flying arrows streaked across the sky and shot into the group of rats. The rats were squeaking noisily and were abnormally ferocious. There were so many of them that they didn't seem to have lost much. The rat swarm was right in front of him, bringing him immense pressure. Many people couldn't help but feel their hearts beat wildly. Their movements changed, and they lost their usual standards. Some people knocked an arrow several times before knocking it, while others dropped their arrows and only released an empty string. Subconsciously, Huang Zhao used all her strength to break the bow and threw away the broken bow in her hand angrily. "This stupid bow," he cursed, and immediately pulled out a short bow. Because the short bows were crudely made, everyone had a spare short bow with them in mind. As for the crossbow, its firing speed could not be compared to a short bow. When the battle started, there was no time to rewind it, so it could only be set aside. Zheng Jin continued to shoot arrows, hitting the target every time. However, the power of the short bow was too weak, and the weight was too low. After shooting many times, Zheng Jin clearly felt that the short bow in his hand had loosened. He immediately threw away the short bow in his hand and changed to another spare bow. In a short period of time, Zheng Jin had already changed 3 short bows. He alone had killed more than 20 flying squirrels. However, there were still a lot of flying squirrels left. There were at least 50 of them. This was more than 5 times the number of exploration team members. It was fine if it was just ordinary flying squirrels, but the key was that there were a total of 7 flying squirrel leaders, and none of them had died. This was a headache. Even the powerful iron arrows fired from the crossbow could not hurt these flying squirrel leaders, let alone the short bows. Zheng Jin felt as if there was a huge rock pressing down on his heart. He knew very well that once this group of rats charged in, the exploration team would suffer heavy losses. The flying squirrel leader at the front entered the range of Zheng Jin's flying dagger. In an instant, the young man's eyes flickered and his arm suddenly shook. The dagger pierced through the air. It was so fast that everyone could only see a flash of light. The light accurately hit the flying squirrel leader. The flying squirrel leader was originally flying in the air, but after being stabbed by the dagger, it was sent flying at an even faster speed. After falling to the ground far away, it did not move at all. When everyone saw this scene, their hearts trembled, but they did not have time to cheer. This was because the swarm of rats did not stop at all. The other flying squirrel leaders charged into the front line. They were all bronze magical beasts. After crashing into the bodies of the exploration team members, they used their claws and huge front teeth to bite crazily. The exploration team members who had been brutally killed fell to the ground one after another. Grass, leaves, and branches flew out from the corpses, but there was no blood or minced meat. It turned out that the ones standing at the front were all puppets. These puppets were stuffed with straw and made into a human shape. Then, they used the potion that ZD had made at the last minute to fool the flying squirrel's sense of smell. Song Su had long discovered through dissection that the flying squirrel's vision was not outstanding. They mainly relied on their sense of smell. The flying squirrel's intelligence was not high either, so these puppets successfully attracted a wave of attacks. A large number of ordinary flying squirrels also pounced on these grass and wood puppets. Those with more puppets could attract more than 10 flying squirrels, and those with fewer could attract 5 or 6. Seeing the group of rats gathered together, Zheng Jin decisively ordered, "Set fire." ZD had been prepared for this moment before the battle began. She immediately took action and threw out the potion. The potion bottle shattered on the rock, and the potion inside fell to the grass, mixing with the previous potion. In an instant, a weak flame burned. Then, the flame expanded into a fire snake. With a leap, it spread out and instantly burned a wall of fire at the front line. The puppets in the wall of fire immediately burned and emitted thick smoke. Some of the flying squirrels were burned until they screamed miserably. More of them were choking on the thick smoke until their snot and tears flowed down their faces. Their sharp sense of smell made their pain double. Almost all of the flying squirrels were fleeing in all directions in a panic. The pressure that the exploration team faced plummeted. This was because even if there were still flying squirrels rushing toward them, there were not many of them. Moreover, they were fleeing to avoid the flames. What greeted them were arrows. Almost half of the flying squirrels were hit and fell on the way. Baya, Huangzhou, and Lanzhou were performing very well. Zhenjin, however, did not make a move. He was focused and motionless like a statue. Suddenly, a leader of the flying squirrels broke through the wall of fire and appeared in his field of vision. Without any hesitation, Zhenjin shot out a flying dagger almost at the same time, hitting the leader of the flying squirrels in the eye. After the leader of the flying squirrels fell to the ground, it rolled a few times and died immediately. However, just as this leader of the flying squirrels fell to the ground, the rest of the flying squirrels rushed out of the wall of fire. None of them were on fire. Ordinary flames could do nothing to them. Even the thick smoke only made them feel uncomfortable. The leaders of the flying squirrels all rushed over. Seeing this scene, Song Su and Zidi's expressions changed. There were still as many as 4 of the remaining flying squirrels. These were all bronze-level magical beasts. Even though Lanzhou and Huangzhou were also bronze-level warriors, it was still very dangerous for them to face off against one of the flying squirrels alone. Humans and beasts were different. The battle prowess of the human race's extraordinaires mostly came from the use of battle energy and magic. However, in this environment, they were unable to use battle energy. Even though battle energy could subtly strengthen the physique of the human race's extraordinaires, this physique was inferior to that of magical beasts. Compared to beasts, humans were born with delicate skin and fragile bones. Huangzhou and Lanzhou could not compare to these flying squirrels with their physique alone. Even after the flying squirrels died, ordinary swords could not cut through their skin and bones. Lanzhou and Huangzhou were already in such a state. The other ordinary members were not a match for the flying squirrels. Once the flying squirrels charge into the crowd, there will definitely be a large number of casualties. Our only hope is Zhenjin. Let's see if this holy knight can quickly kill these flying squirrels. Song Su's eyes flashed with worry. He had a clear understanding of the current situation. Now is not the time to continue hiding your strength, my lord. Song Su stared at Zhenjin, encouraging him from the bottom of his heart. He was an intelligent person. He understood that in this kind of island, he could only rely on the strong to have more hope of survival. Because of this, he had taken the initiative to plan and promote the whole exploration team to rely on Zhenjin. Zhenjin took a deep breath. He knew that everyone was waiting for him to display his abilities. However, he could not use his battle energy. The battle was imminent, and Zhenjin did not have much time left. He only had one chance to use his flying daggers. Then I'll get rid of all of you in one go. Zhenjin's gaze was sharp and resolute. He reached into his bosom, holding 2 daggers in each hand. In the next moment, he shook his arms, and 4 daggers shot out at the same time. The force of a flying dagger was far more powerful than that of a crossbow. At the same time, each flying dagger was unusually accurate, and they hit their targets in the blink of an eye. Song Su had just opened his mouth to cry out in surprise when he saw the flying squirrels fall to the ground. Zhenjin had already secured victory. It's done. Zhenjin was excited. His expression was as firm as steel, and his expression did not change. The muscles in his arms trembled uncontrollably. Zhenjin had used all his strength in the attack just now, fully displaying the exquisite skills brought about by his memory recovery. A strong numbness and soreness permeated his arms. Since the start of the battle, Zhenjin had first shot a large number of arrows, then threw flying daggers. In order to kill the flying squirrels, Zhenjin had used all his strength every time he threw a flying dagger. At this point, he had basically reached the limit of the youth's physical strength. It was important to note that these flying daggers were all ordinary weapons. The reason why he had been able to kill the flying squirrels was all because of Zhen Jin's astonishing accuracy at their fatal weaknesses, as well as the terrifying speed and strength of his crazy throwing. It's done. 4 hits in 1 hit. These few flying squirrels were unable to force out Lord Zhen Jin's true strength. Sir is really too strong. Everyone's morale was greatly boosted. Just as they began to cheer, one of the flying squirrels that had fallen to the ground suddenly came back to life. It sprinted on the ground, its speed so fast that it left a faint afterimage behind it. At the same time, its life force completely erupted. It was no longer bronze, but dark iron. "Be careful," ZD screamed. This was a rather cunning flying squirrel. Its true strength was dark iron, but it had disguised its bronze aura. It had a unique method to conceal its aura and hide from Lan Zhao's detection. It was the leader of the flying squirrels. At this moment, Zhen Jin once again felt the aura of death. Speaking of which, he had killed many magical beasts: silver-ranked blue wolf, monkey-tail brown bear, and blade spider. But killing the blue wolf was because the timing was too good with the help of the wild python green vines in the river. The monkey-tail brown bear took advantage of the fact that the brown bear was heavily injured. Even so, Zhen Jin had almost died. His life was almost saved. After killing the blade spider, the spider had become careless. At the same time, Zhen Jin had mutated and hit the spider's vital point. In terms of strength, Zhen Jin was definitely not a match for the silver spider. The human body was rather fragile. Compared to beasts, humans did not have sharp claws and teeth, thick fur, strong physiques, and bones that were as hard as iron. Usually, humans could not even outrun dogs, breathe underwater like fish, or fly in the air like birds. In terms of strength, Zhen Jin was able to suppress the bronze leader, which made Song Su very surprised. He guessed that Zhen Jin might have the cultivation of a gold rank. The greatest advantage of humans was their intelligence. Humans could use their intelligence to create tools and use them. Humans could create swords that were comparable to the claws and teeth of beasts. Humans had also researched magic and battle energy to increase their own strength. But on this island, low-level magic and battle energy were forbidden. Magical beasts could not use their natural abilities, but they still retained their strong and fierce physiques. Without battle energy and magic, the natural weakness of the human body was immediately exposed. So a dark iron level flying squirrel leader could of course pose a fatal threat to Zhen Jin. It is much faster than me and is extremely agile. Even if a normal sword slashed at it, it would not cause any effective damage. But in this regard, I still have a weapon made from the spider's blade. But what is truly frightening is not its agility, nor its claws and teeth, but the terrifying electric current it can release. Zhen Jin frowned. When danger came, he realized that he had an excellent quality of a battle-hardened warrior. The more dangerous the situation, the faster he thought, and the clearer his thoughts. He had already tested the flying dagger just now, and it could not hurt the dark iron-level flying squirrel leader. The spider's blade in Zhen Jin's hand was the best weapon to kill it, but at the same time, the electric current released by the flying squirrel could also take Zhen Jin's life in an instant. Unless I can summon battle energy in an instant, I can only defend against the electric current with battle energy protecting my body. A ferocious look flashed in Zhen Jin's eyes. Battle energy. Battle chi. He really needed battle chi. Shengming Emperor, my God, listen to the prayers of your believers. Let me awaken my past memories. Let me regain control of my battle energy. Zhen Jin screamed in his heart, but God still did not respond. Damn it. Zhen Jin gritted his teeth. Without battle energy, he could not defend against the electric current. Both sides in the battle were strong in offense and weak in defense. It all depended on who could successfully launch a fatal attack on the opponent. Closer, even closer. Roar. Just as Zhen Jin was about to charge forward, he suddenly heard a mysterious beast roar. There are other magical beasts, Wait, this beast roar is somewhat familiar. In the next moment, Jean was suddenly stunned. Jean sensed that there was a small round ball hidden in the depths of his heart. This small ball was only the size of a thumb, but it was bright red in color. Its surface was not smooth, like an extremely delicate walnut, with extremely fine and crisscrossing lines. But in terms of texture, it was faintly transparent, like a crystal, and seemed to be shining from the inside out. The bright red ball trembled slightly, bursting forth with an invisible force. This powerful force seeped into his blood and quickly spread throughout Jean's body, constantly shaking Jean's chest. The bloody light of the small ball was rapidly diminishing. Jean's arms were originally extremely sore, but with the influx of this force, his arms quickly recovered, and his muscles bulged and expanded rapidly. Jean's clothes and vambraces were stretched until they creaked. Although he was covered by clothes, Jean could clearly feel the thick black hair. His bones and muscles had transformed from human arms into a pair of bear arms. In just an instant, Jean's arms not only recovered, but they were also several times stronger than before. This feeling, Jean's heart shook violently. This feeling was clearly the same as when his hands mutated when he attacked the silver spider. But this time, it wasn't his hands that had mutated. Instead, it was his arms that had mutated. Without too much time to think about it, Jean took out a dagger and threw it with all his strength. Bang! There was a slight explosion. It turned out that the youth's swing was too violent, and it directly blew up the air. The flying dagger pierced through the air and actually made a sharp whistling sound. Everyone saw a bright silver line flash through the air, accurately piercing through the black ironhead rat, and then its speed greatly decreased, and it deeply embedded itself into the grass. The charging black ironhead rat fell backwards and fell to the ground, motionless. Its entire head had been pierced, and its blood quickly soaked the surrounding grass. The battlefield was silent. Chapter 43. There was no longer a single rat on the battlefield. The rats panicked and collapsed, scattering in all directions. Victory! This is a great victory. Jean, Huang Zhao, and Lan Zhao took the lead, and everyone raised their arms and cheered. This is a holy night. Song Su sighed and was curious. But what happened just now? His entire arm grew bigger. Is it some kind of secret technique? Could it be that he can use battle chi? Did he use some kind of method to temporarily break through the suppression of the island's environment? What is the price? What level of battle chi does he have? Golden battle chi? Although Jean had clearly told Song Su that he could not use battle chi. But at that time, Jean had just taken charge of the exploration team. Song Su believed that Jean did not trust the others at that time. So when he asked, Jean hid his true strength. ZD was silent. She only cast her admiring gaze on Jean. Everyone knew that if the black iron head rats rushed into the crowd, there would definitely be heavy casualties. However, Jean relied on his own strength to save everyone. Without a doubt, he was a hero. From the beginning to the end, he was in control of the battle. He was a qualified leader. The members of the exploration team were all happy and proud that they could be led by Jean. Jean frowned slightly. The strange feeling disappeared, just like the last time. The mysterious invisible power also dissipated, and the young man's arms returned to normal. At the same time, a strong sense of emptiness enveloped his entire body. Exhaustion was like a tide, continuously attacking him. Jean kept his expression unchanged, trying his best to hide his emptiness and exhaustion. At the same time, he was glad that this time, the mutation of his arms was hidden under his armor and clothes and was not exposed. Otherwise, he would have to explain it to others. The feeling of relief quickly dissipated, and a strong sense of doubt surged into his heart. It seems that the source of my mutation is the blood-red ball in my heart. What is it? Why does it feel like the core of a magical beast? Thinking of this, the teenager laughed at himself. How could a human have a magic crystal? Only magical beasts had crystal cores. Jean scanned the surroundings as the cheers of the crowd grew louder and louder. He suppressed the doubts in his heart and gave the order to clean up the battlefield. The flames burned fiercely, but with the help of ZD's medicine, the fire was quickly extinguished. Huang Zhao and the others were searching the charred battlefield. Occasionally, he would stop and pick up a piece of pterosaur's corpse. Due to the fire, the flying squirrel's corpse was completely charred, and its surface was carbonized. After Huang Zhao patted the corpse, the charcoal on the surface of the flying squirrel's corpse fell off piece by piece, revealing the cooked red meat inside. The yellow algae took a deep breath, and a rich meaty aroma entered his nostrils. Another good piece of meat. Huang Zhao beamed. She swept her eyes over the battlefield and sighed from the bottom of her heart. This is my favorite hunting method. Over the past few days, he had been in charge of hunting alone. There were almost no results. The survival skills of a hunter were not that easy to master. Huang Zhao had always made a living on the sea. The experience of hunting in the forest reminded him of the difficult and clumsy times when he had just boarded the ship. On the other side, Lan Zhao was dealing with the only dark, iron-level flying squirrel leader. Only half of the flying squirrel's blood had been collected. After Lan Zhao dealt with it, he had a thought and picked up the dagger that had killed the dark, iron-headed flying squirrel. Looking at the dagger, the blue-green algae's pupils couldn't help but shrink slightly. The tip of the dagger was completely deformed, and he could not see any sharpness. This ordinary dagger has the power to kill a dark, iron-level magical beast just by throwing it. Lan Zhao looked at Jin, the respect in his eyes growing stronger. Cleaning up the battlefield was a great harvest. Everyone was beaming with joy. The bloodstains on the battlefield, as well as the flying squirrel meat that was completely burnt and inedible, were all taken care of. No other ferocious beasts would be attracted by the smell of blood and meat. The exploration team returned to camp victorious and continued to deal with the spoils of war. At night, a bonfire was lit, and everyone sat in a circle, discussing the day's harvest. Seeing so much food with their own eyes, the team members' hearts were completely at ease. A completely deformed dagger was passed around in everyone's hands. It really is an ordinary dagger, and it killed a dark, iron-level magical beast just like that. Lord Jin is really strong. I think he must have activated his fighting aura at that moment. Otherwise, how could he have such a terrifying power? I really want to know Lord Jin's true strength. Anyway, if it's not bronze or dark iron level, he's at least a silver knight with silver fighting aura. Silver fighting aura. At this age, Jin is really a genius. It could also be gold. After all, none of us have seen Sir Jin's fighting aura with our own eyes. If it's gold, then it's even more terrifying. Following such a person, our future will definitely be bright. The reason we can be under Sir Jin's command now is because of the shipwreck. If it were any other time, how would it be possible? If we can always follow Sir Jin, in the future, when Lord Jin becomes the Lord of White Sand City, I might be able to become an official of White Sand City. Damn it, I don't want anything else. I just want to be a guard at the city gate. In the past, when I entered the city, I was always troubled. In the future, I will guard the gate and make things difficult for others. It's fun. No one knew whose idea it was, but it caused everyone to burst into laughter. The success of the hunt allowed Jin to gain everyone's recognition. The entire exploration team had always thought that Jin's future was very bright. People always sought advantages and avoided disadvantages. Many people began to openly express their intention to follow Jin. This would never have happened in the past. This is the harvest of the other layer. Sang-Soo sat in a corner and listened to everyone chatting and laughing. He understood in his heart. His gaze was also focused on the dagger in the other person's hand. Recalling the scene on the battlefield, Sang-Soo also secretly guessed. At that moment, Jin's arms clearly swelled and then exploded with a terrifying power. The bloodline of the 100 Needles family originates from the legendary magical beast, the Golden Needle Queen Bee. This bloodline is not praised in terms of power. Did he use some kind of cheese secret technique? In the end, the dagger was passed into Baya's hands. Baya looked at the dagger, his eyes shining with the light of hope. This is a knight. I also want to become such a person. Hey, Baya, are you done looking at it? If you're done, return it to me. This dagger is very important. From now on, it will be my family's family heirloom. Huang Zhao giggled. Baya could only reluctantly return the dagger to Huang Zhao. No matter which continent, every race worshipped the strong, and this kind of worship could easily turn into loyalty. It seems that Huang Zhao and Lan Zhao, these two brothers, have already decided to completely rely on Lord Jinjin and strive to become his retainers. Song Su said meaningfully to ZD. ZD sat next to Song Su. She raised her head and glanced at the people around the bonfire, then began to shake the potion in her hand. These two brothers' aptitudes are not good. If they don't have a chance in the future, I'm afraid that bronze rank is their limit. But according to my understanding of Lord Jinjin, he will not mistreat any of his followers. At this point, ZD looked at Song Su and added, "It doesn't matter if this follower is extraordinary or not." Song Su immediately understood the meaning behind ZD's words. He smiled bitterly and shook his head. Old trees, no matter how much sunlight they bask in, they will not radiate in new spring. The potion in ZD's hand gradually changed color. She stood up. I still have things to take care of. ZD returned to her tent, while Junjin pondered in his tent. His face was full of distress. I still can't sense it. Junjin had already tried his best to remember that strange feeling when the mutation occurred. But this did not allow him to actively sense the crystal core in his heart. It was as if there was no such thing at all. Junjin subconsciously placed his palm on his left chest, feeling his heartbeat, and frowned. No, I did sense it at that time. There's indeed something similar to a magic crystal growing in my heart. It seems to be in harmony with my heart. Why can't I sense it? I clearly sensed it before. Why, what exactly is missing? Junjin fell into deep thought. He really wanted to find a way to use the crystal core. Now that he was unable to use his Do Chi, this mutation could instantly increase his battle strength, which was very helpful to him. During the first mutation, he killed the silver magic beast, the blade spider. At that time, he felt the strange flow of his blood. The second time, he killed the black steel rat with a flying dagger. Not only did he feel the flow of his blood, but he also further sensed the mysterious crystal core in his heart. It was the formless energy that was emitted from the crystal core that flowed into his blood. It flowed through his entire body and finally into his arm. So, my previous guess was wrong. The real reason is not the blood, but this magic crystal. This power is neither Do Chi nor magic. It's really amazing. Jinjin sighed. He then tried to analyze these two experiences. Based on my current attempts, I have no way to initiate the mutation. In that case, what exactly triggered this ability in these two mutations? What is the common point of these two mutations? The first time, when I was on the brink of death, the missing memories emerged. My emotions were very complicated and agitated. The second time, when I was facing the black steel rat, I was afraid of its electric shock, so I felt nervous and faced the threat of death. The biggest similarity between these two experiences was that Junjin faced the threat of death. Therefore, all kinds of emotions such as nervousness, anxiety, fear, determination, killing intent, etc. If it was emotional stimulation that led to the mutation, then, if I continue to be stimulated, will I be able to master the ability to initiate the mutation? Junjin's thoughts diverged. After the two mutations, he had obvious improvements. The first time, he only sensed the blood flow. The second time, he went deep into his heart and found the mysterious crystal core. And the last time, it was the claws, but this time it's the arm. Junjin guessed that the mutation seemed to be based on his subconscious, forming the most advantageous situation at that time. Can I control this mutation ability and transform into whatever I want in the future? If I completely transform, Will I be in the form of a monkey-tail brown bear? Also, I found that after the mutation, the bloody light of the crystal core obviously weakened a lot. How many more mutations can support me? Jean began to look deeper. Along with this process, some of the doubts in his heart were eliminated, but more were added. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.